So hello, everyone. This is James Carter over here at People's Island with the State Historic Preservation Office. I just wanted to go, before we start everything, a couple technical run through, which is why I'm doing this right now, because I've already hit the issue. Could you please make sure that your microphones are muted if you are not the person who's supposed to be talking? This helps prevent sort of feedback issues. Also, we generally request, this kind of goes across the board, but particularly if board members, you know, an ideal situation, we don't necessarily require video. So if you want to disable your video, that would be ideal. It helps sort of prevent bandwidth issues. And I'm requesting, if you're not part of the state review board, that you definitely please disable video. Please make sure you're muted the entire time unless you're asked to unmute. So if you're here as a guest and when it comes time, the person presenting your nomination will prompt you to unmute yourself.
Okay.
I think that's everything.
Okay, advancing. Okay. Doug, can you hear us? I guess for well, let's see if we have a quorum first.
Yeah, let me know when we're ready to go and I'll call the meeting to order.
Okay, we're just checking to see if we've got a quorum. One moment.
I think all of the board members are participating today, so we should be there.
Yeah, just want to make sure they're all signed in.
Great.
One moment. Okay, Chairman Pirelli, we do have a quorum, so you can go ahead and begin the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I have 10:03 a.m. and at this time I would like to call to order the 186th meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. Today is Thursday, December 9th, 2021, and this is a WebEx meeting with a contingent of people at People's Island and others scattered across the state and beyond. We will begin with our roll call. I'll ask Deputy Commissioner Daniel McKay to call the roll, and I will ask the board members to briefly introduce their role on the board when their name is called.
Good morning, Chairman Pirelli. This is Daniel McKay. I am serving as secretary to the review board today, and hope to live up to those responsibilities. So I will call the roll, and as Doug requested, would you please respond present and introduce yourself briefly. So Doug Pirelli, board chair.
Thank you, Daniel. Present, I am a clinical assistant professor at the University of Buffalo. I'm the president of the New York Archaeological Council and serving in my second term as chair for the State Board for Historic Preservation in my role as an archaeologist on the board.
Thank you, Doug. Proceeding in alphabetical order, Wint Aldrich.
Here, he may be muted. He's muted.
Wint, you may be muted.
Try that. Do you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. I'm Wint Aldrich. I'm present, retired Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation. and I believe I occupy a seat as historian on the board.
Yes, sir. Carol Clark.
I'm Carol Clark. I'm an adjunct professor of historic preservation at Columbia University. I also teach at Pratt Institute and NYU, and I am a former deputy commissioner at State Parks.
Thank you, Carol. Kristen Herron.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Herron, Program Director for Architecture, Design, and State Council on the Arts, and I serve as the representative of that agency.
Thank you, Kristen. Erica Krieger. Doug, it's our understanding that Erica may be in and out of the meeting. She was not part of the count for the establishment of quorum just a few moments ago, so I will advance to Jennifer Lemack.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum and serve as the Commissioner of Education's proxy.
Thank you, Jennifer. I have skipped Jay DiLorenzo. Forgive me, Jay, are you present?
Also muted.
You may be muted, sir. Jay, we show you on screen as part of the call, but you are muted.
Hey, how about now?
Now you're good, sir.
Okay, it's Jay DiLorenzo, President of the Preservation League of New York State.
Thank you. All this, it's new to all of us, Jay, we understand. Wayne Goodman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wayne Goodman. I am the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester. So thanks,
Wayne, thank you, sir. Gretchen Soren, welcome.
Hello. Good morning. I am the director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program, Museum Studies Training Program, and a historian.
Thank you, Gretchen. Lucy Rockefeller-Waletsky.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Lucy Waletsky, and I'm chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And this is unfortunately my last meeting with all of you.
Thank you, Lucy. We look forward to recognizing your service to the board later in this program. Chuck Vandry. Chuck, you may be muted.
I am being sorry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Vandry. I'm an archaeologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I am the Historic Preservation Officer for that agency and hold Commissioner Basil Sago's proxy on the board.
Doug, Chairman Pirelli, there being 10 members participating, a quorum has been confirmed.
Thank you, Daniel. We move next on our agenda to the approval of the September meeting minutes. The board has received the draft and revised version of those minutes for review. Do we have any further comments or corrections for the September 2021 minutes? If there are no additions or corrections, I would seek a motion to approve.
This is
So
Jay.
approved.
So moved.
So I have Lucy Waletsky in the first position there, seconded by, who was seconded, please?
Carol Clark.
Carol, thank you. Chairman Pirelli, the minutes have been approved by unanimous consent.
Correct. And moving forward, when we do our voting, because this is a remote meeting, I just want to remind everybody that I will be asking for those who are opposed or abstaining. And if there are no opposition or abstentions, we will be approving National Register forms by unanimous consent.
Thank you, sir.
Kathy, how would you like to introduce and acknowledge any guests that are present today?
I think we're going to do that, Doug, at the beginning of the National Register nomination presentation. So I'll wait for that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Then we will move to the next agenda item, which is the Deputy Commissioner's report and Daniel McKay.
Doug, I will be fairly brief this morning. We have certainly been quite busy here at the Division for Historic Preservation. There is a lot underway. Programs continue to perform at sort of at a nation-leading pace. It appears, for example, that we will be #1 in the nation in terms of federal and state or federal tax credit use once again. Obviously, the National Register program agenda today is quite full and delightfully diverse, but I want to focus my remarks on just a few items. One, I want to acknowledge that staff is working a hybrid schedule right now. Approximately, we are under instructions to be working 50% in office, 50% at home, and that holds true for most of our staff here at the Division for Historic Preservation. I just want to say it's been a delight for me, certainly, to see staff back again in person, and there are select days during the week when most staff, or all staff in particular units, are in place at Peebles Island all together for specific, anyway, it's just been a treat to hear conversations in the hallway, chatter down the floor, to see folks in person, and I'm glad that the staff here has found a way to move forward and return to this format of work during the pandemic. So it's just there's good energy here at Peebles right now. Another reason for good energy is I want to acknowledge some new hires since the September meeting. Sarah McIver has joined our staff in the Tax Credit and Compliance Unit. She was formerly the Preservation Compliance staffer at MTA and comes to us with a great deal of experience. She has arrived with a lot of enthusiasm, and we're very happy to have added her to that unit staff. And Jeff Brendremer, who was announced at the September meeting, has begun work in the archaeology unit. He is coordinating our NAGPRA compliance responsibilities, and has really arrived has just dug into that work in significant fashion, and is already helping the agency fulfill responsibilities under NAGPRA. So we're very happy to have his assistance here. We have hired one additional staff person in the archaeology unit. They will start in January, and one additional staff person in the tax credit and compliance unit. They also will start in January, and I will introduce them in greater detail at the March meeting. But we're certainly happy to have new staff, additional staff adding to those programs. Additionally, in terms of staffing, as you know, the director position, Michael Lynch's former title, is vacant. We have interviews with select candidates coming up later in December and expect to make an appointment to the director position by January. The Director of Community Preservation Services Bureau and the Tax Credit Unit, also formerly held by Julian Adams. We expect to have interviews for that position in January with an appointment sometime in February. Additionally, Greg Smith and Travis Bowman and other staff in at the Bureau of Historic Sites are preparing for interviews for replacing 2 retired staff in the Bureau, our Framing and Gilding Conservator and our Furniture Conservator. Both those positions will be filled by sometime in January, and I very much appreciate the agency's commitment to restaffing what really is a very exceptional service that we provide here to our state historic sites. The conservator positions are quite unique for a state-level agency, but given the width and breadth of our state historic site system, these positions have been unfilled during the pandemic, They were vacated by retirement, and we're very pleased that the agency has recommitted to filling them, and we should have announcements by the March meeting in terms of restaffing. Finally, I have one additional retirement to announce. Marie Sarchiapone, who has served the agency for several decades in a number of roles, most recently in the Community Engagement and Homeowner Tax Credit Program unit. She has announced her retirement as of early January, and Marie's work, many people know her around the state from her work in the grants unit based out of New York City, and that is certainly an additional notable retirement from our staff. So anyway, I will leave it at that and look forward to reporting out on progress on these hirings at the March meeting and providing sort of a fuller policy perspective once we see the executive budget released and state of the state details that would inform the work of the division. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Daniel. Next agenda item is the Historic Business Legacy Program Report. Christina.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
This is Wint. Could I just ask one question of Daniel? Very good report.
Please.
We've heard that there's going to be an Environmental Bond Act, and I'm just wondering if, based on what is now known of the governor's intentions and that of the legislature, whether there are likely to be substantial benefit to the state historic sites and to the division's programs otherwise coming from that Bond Act.
Wint, thank you for that question. I will also speak to the Environmental Protection Fund. So there are two matters here. The Environmental Bond Act, I don't think the new version of that has been completely tooled. And so I think the agency is monitoring and advocating for a fairly big role or a benefit to the agency from that Bond Act, but I don't think the details are yet available. Certainly, executive staff is aware of the opportunity and aware of the need. Additionally, there is state-level advocacy from organizations like the Nature Conservancy, environmental advocates, and others to expand the Environmental Protection Fund, which has a currently set statutory limit of $300 million, to increase that fund to $400 million annually. And I think that's another place for the agency and outside advocates to look for an increase in agency programmatic allocations. Here at the division, the Environmental Protection Fund touches us in several ways. Certainly there's the Historic Preservation Grants Program, which a number of friends groups access in support of projects at our state historic sites, as well as elsewhere in the state park system. But it also provides funding for programmatic activity, purchase of, replica or other items for our collections. So there's a number of smaller, modest benefits from the EPF that accrue to the Division for Historic Preservation specifically, and it is our hope that an increase in the overall EPF allocation will lead to increases in those internal budget lines, allocation lines for us as well. I will put together a report for the board as soon as additional details are available, and so perhaps by late January, I can put some flesh on the bones I just described.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Wint. Okay, before I go forward, I just want to remind people to mute your microphones if you are not currently muted and you are not speaking. Next agenda item is a Historic Business Legacy Program report. Christina, would you proceed and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I on?
You're on, but you're faint.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Christina Vagvolgi. That's how you say that weird name. I'm here to tell everyone about this new initiative. So last year, Member Daniel O'Donnell and Senator Jose Serrano introduced legislation to create the Historic Business Preservation Registry in New York State. And so the legislation went into effect earlier this year, and our office, Office of Historic Preservation, is currently administering the program. And basically, the goal of the registry is to recognize historic businesses that are valuable cultural assets. They're, the backbone of villages and towns and cities across the state, and they've helped to shape the history and identities of the communities that they serve. The registry will allow the state to recognize and honor the businesses while providing educational and promotional assistance to ensure their continued viability and success. So businesses can be nominated to the registry by the governor, lieutenant governor, or a New York State Senate or Assembly member, and each of those members can nominate up to 2 historic businesses per term. And it's basically pretty straightforward criteria. The businesses need to have been in operation for 50 or more years with no break in operations exceeding 2 years. They must demonstrate a contribution to the history and or identity of the municipality in which they are located, and they must be committed to maintaining the physical features and traditions that define their business, such as a craft, a culinary, or an art form. The process is not competitive as long as the nomination demonstrates that the business meets those eligibility criteria. It'll be added to the registry. We're currently in the process of developing an interactive storyboard map that will be featured on our website. We expect to have that launch in the coming year, and that will coincide with the announcement that the governor will be making about the program. And we had put out a call for nominations, and we've gotten such a great response. A lot of inquiries and a lot of businesses already nominated. You can see some sneak previews here. We've got a hot dog restaurant, a hardware store. Lodges was the first thing that I thought of personally when this registry came up, and we even had an inquiry about a funeral home. And one important thing you'll see from the middle photo is that it doesn't tie to the building. So although we are the Historic Preservation Office and we advocate for, physical buildings most of the time, this is more about the business entity. And so it's okay if they're not in a historic building as long as, they've been in operation and they're continuing to do what they do. Then we just want to help to honor them.
Christina, can you clarify where Texas Hots is, please?
Oh, Texas Hot is in, hold on. I should know.
I think it's in the southern tier.
Hey, Daniel, this is Wayne. I think that's in Wellsville.
I think you're right. Okay.
You win.
Hey.
Christina.
It is in Wellsville. That's correct.
Christina, does this new law embrace farms as well, or is it more retail businesses?
It's a business where there's like an exchange of goods and services. This actually just came up because someone was asking about a not-for-profit. So a farm that's selling their goods, that would be counting as a business, I would think.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was great.
Chairman Pirelli, this is Secretary McKay. I just want to acknowledge that Erica Krieger has joined the call.
Excellent, thank you. That's good timing because I believe we are moving forward to the National Register nomination reviews. And Kathy Howe will introduce the range of forms we're going to be reviewing and acknowledge any guests.
Good morning, everyone. We definitely have a very diverse roster of nominations from around the state today. This map shows the distribution. We've got 2 summer cottage communities, one in Western New York and one up in the Thousand Islands. We've got the New York City home of Lillian Wald, the nationally significant public health nurse and progressive reformer. We've got the Long Island home of Elena Kooning, a very important abstract expressionist artist. and the home of a North Country lumber baron, among many others. So we're really excited about this roster. I want to thank Virginia Bartos for putting together today's PowerPoint, and also James Carter for serving as our WebEx pilot today. A hearty welcome to all of our nomination sponsors, owners, and consultants who are attending virtually today. I will ask staff to introduce anyone representing a property who wishes to say a few words after the staff gives their presentation and before a vote is taken. And so we're most grateful for all of the hard work that you have put into the nominations and working with our excellent NR staff to bring these to fruition today. So with that, we'll get started up in the Thousand Islands with Dan Bogro.
Kathy, just 1 second here. Dan, could you hold on? Was it Erica that needed to introduce herself?
Yes.
I thought I heard her try to chime in and she got cut off. I want to give her an opportunity to say hello.
I'm hoping you can hear me now. I was waiting for a good time to kind of interrupt the flow of the meeting. This is Erica Krieger. I'm an architect. I'm here representing the Secretary of State for today's meeting, and I will be perhaps having to log on and off depending on for the reasons I gave in my earlier email. So, but I'm here for now.
Greetings, thank you. Okay, Dan, take it away.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. My first nomination today is for the Thousand Island Park Historic District boundary amendment and additional documentation. The following nomination is an expansion of the Thousand Island Park Historic District and provides significantly more detail on the historic properties within the original boundary area and the expanded boundary. I'll give an overview of the district, which was listed in the National Register in 1982, and then discuss the updates. Next slide, please. Thousand Island Park, established in 1875 as a Methodist campground, is located at the southwest end of Wellesley Island in the town of Orleans, Jefferson County. Please note the street grid plan shown on the map here. Next slide, please. The original street plan, designed in 1875 and revised in the 1880s, remains easily legible, consisting of two gridded areas set at an angle to one another to either side of St. Lawrence Avenue, the broadest street in the community. Next slide, please. Most streets are lined by late 19th and these are some of the pictures of boathouses that we'll be getting to momentarily. Most streets are lined by late 19th and early 20th century summer cottages, ranging in scale from simple 1 to 2-story wood frame cottages to far more elaborate summer homes. St. Lawrence Avenue forms a prominent axis anchored by the main dock pavilion, seen in the top left, originally a landing dock for steamboats at the south end, and the tabernacle, the primary gathering space originally used for religious services, at the north end. Much of the shoreline is occupied by boathouses, ranging from simple one-slip shelters to large buildings with multiple boat slips, docks, and in some cases, roof decks and other recreational amenities. Nearly all of the non-contributing buildings postdate the period of significance, which previously ended in 1920, but has been increased to 1940. Next slide, please. Here we have examples of some of the early frame and camp cottages that existed before people started building houses. Thousand Island Park is significant under Criterion A in the areas of religion and entertainment and recreation for its association with the evolution of the Methodist campground tradition, and specifically as a distinctive merging of two historical trends: the evolution of the Methodist camp meeting tradition and the rising popularity of summer vacations for middle and upper middle class families in the Thousand Islands and similar regions. Next slide, please. Thousand Island Park is also significant under Criterion C in the areas of architecture and community planning and development. Architecturally, Thousand Island Park features an outstanding, highly intact collection of cottages built between 1875 and the 1920s. The earliest cottages have simple gabled forms and are often decorated with elaborate East Lake style ornamentation that displays the ingenuity of builders who combined stock elements available at local lumber yards in inventive ways, in some cases gradually transforming canvas tents into frame cottages. Next slide, please. Many of these cottages were then expanded to accommodate growing families and budgets. Late 19th century cottages were often built with similar forms and ornamentation at a grander scale, with cross-gable massing and even more impressive ornamentation. Some cottages, built around the turn of the 20th century, are grand summer homes in fashionable domestic styles, sometimes still incorporating design elements similar to earlier campground cottages. Early 20th century cottages include bungalows and other craftsman-style houses, which are particularly prevalent in an area of the park that was devastated by a fire in 1912. Next slide, please. In the area of community planning and development, Thousand Island Park is significant for the practical and symbolic coherence excuse me, of its site plan, designed by engineer Frank A. Hines in 1875 and modified by Hines in the 1880s. The plan is a creative amalgamation of multiple 19th century planning approaches, combining a regular grid in one part of the park with a romantic curvilinear street plan in another, and featuring a broad tree-lined formal avenue creating a strong axial relationship between two key functional and symbolic focal points. As the community developed and matured from a rustic campground to a sophisticated, family-oriented summer resort, Hines's plan continued to shape its physical growth. Next slide, please. The map shown here shows the original boundary, the expanded boundary, and an area where we are slightly contracting the original boundary. The present boundary increase is being undertaken to expand the boundaries to include the boathouses, which were excluded from the original nomination because they were considered to have low integrity. The boathouses are important to the history of recreation and design in Thousand Island Park, and thus are now being reevaluated as a contributing resource type to the park's significance. In addition, with the passage of time, the period of significance is being extended from the original end date of 1920 to 1940 to better reflect the significance of the park into the early 20th century. The end date of 1940 reflects changes in transportation, particularly the opening of the Thousand Islands Bridge that provided automobile access to Wellesley Island, ending the days of steamboat transportation to the park, and vacationing that changed the nature of the summer experience at Thousand Island Park. While the opening of the bridge system connecting Wellesley Island to the U.S. and Canadian mainlands may have been a source of optimism about Thousand Island Park's future, the combination of the Depression and World War II was the start of a long period of decline and retrenchment for the park. Thousand Island Park wouldn't see a resurgence again until the 1980s. And the boundary contraction is a correction of the original boundary, which played a little fast and loose in that part of the map. So after looking closely at the tax parcels, it looked like this should not have been included in the first place. And because the boathouses extend past the shoreline, they were excluded from the original boundary. So we have expanded the boundary now to conform to the tax parcels, which appears to be more accurate and also incorporates all of the properties associated with Thousand Island Park. Next slide, please. The nomination was written by Katie Eggers-Como, formerly of Barrow Architecture, and now the new Vice President for Policy and Preservation at the Preservation League of New York State. I wanted to congratulate Katie on her new position. I believe that she's with us today, along with Julie Mathine with Thousand Island Park, and Julie would like to say a few words. Julie is a cottage owner and chair of the National Register Update Committee that works closely with Katie during the project.
Hi, this is Katie actually, and I'm not sure if Julie is on because we started early, so I'm not sure she has made it in time.
Yeah, I don't see her in the list of folks here. Katie, if you'd like to make any comments, you can. Otherwise, I'll put it to the board if they have any questions.
Yeah, I wasn't really planning to say anything, but this was a great project to do. You can all see just how interesting and beautiful this site is. So it was a real pleasure to work on this one. And I learned a lot. And thank you, Dan, for doing such a nice presentation.
Thank you, Dan and Katie. That's the Thousand Island Park Historic District boundary increase and additional documentation, including the boathouses. Do we have any questions or comments from the board?
This is Wint, a spectacular property and a wonderful nomination. And I think it's great that it's going to include now part of the river, so to speak, which is the purpose of the creation of this community in the first instance. I think it should be said that a number of people, resident, at least seasonally resident in the Thousand Islands Park, have volunteered to become the stewards of a state-owned property across the navigation channel, the Rock Island Lighthouse, and which was really abandoned by the federal government and not functional for a long time. It's been restored, and it's, of course, a centerpiece in the view from these boathouses and many of these houses, but it's a wonderful example of an exchange of commitment and values between the state and the community like this. Thank you. I'd be happy to move the nomination.
Thank you, Wint. Any other questions or comments? We have a motion.
I'd be happy
Do we have
to
a second?
I'd be happy to second it. This is Lucy.
Second, Lucy. Anyone opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion passes by unanimous consent. Before we move on, I would just ask again if people would mute their microphone if they're not speaking and they're just listening. Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Doug, excuse me. It looks like Julie has joined us, so I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak on behalf of the nomination, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, everybody. And thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm loving watching the slides on my screen here. I'm thinking of summer. As you probably know, the last survey for National Register purposes, the first one actually, but the only one that we've had before this one was done in the late 1980s. And we all realized that it was high time that we did another, and there had been a lot of changes in Thousand Island Park since then. And so this project was an enormous community effort. We were able to raise the money to complete the survey. We also had support from the John Ben Snow Foundation, the Preservation League of New York State, and the Thousand Island Park Foundation, and we raised $20,000 from individual donations from the community, and we had throughout 2 summers we had about 50 volunteers working with Katie and our interns, walking through the park and doing all of the survey work with their cell phones or tablets. Which was something we wanted to do because we're going to put all that information into an online resource for people to be able to use, people on the park or not on the park, all kinds of people. So it's been a very positive experience. We're very gratified that the committee has adopted the application and will be moving along. And we would really like to thank SHPO staff. Dan, thank you so much for your work on this. And we especially want to thank our historic preservationists, Katie Eggers-Como, who just worked so wonderfully with the community, with our interns, with our volunteers, in order to get this survey done on time and on budget, I'm happy to say.
Thank you. Very glad you were able to join us and add that.
Thank you so much for your consideration and for your support.
Sure thing. Okay, that brings us to Dan's next nomination.
The Basilan House in the village of... Sorry, Doug.
Go ahead.
The Basilan House in the village of Croghan, Lewis County, is being nominated in association with Criterion B in the areas of conservation and industry. The Basilan House is locally significant under Criterion B in the area of industry for its association with American lumber magnate Theodore Basilan, born 1851, died 1914. Basilan was a wealthy local businessman whose lumber mills were the largest employer of Croghan residents from the 1880s until his retirement in 1909. The house was Basilan's primary lifelong residence. The property is also significant under Criterion B in the area of conservation, as Basilan was one of the first 3 New York State Forest Commissioners, and the property has a period of significance from circa 1855 to 1914. Next slide, please. The property sits in the village at the center, the property sits in the village center at the corner of Main and Bank Street amidst commercial and ecclesiastical buildings and consists of the primary dwelling located to the east of the parcel in the image on the right, Basilan's business office at the northwest corner, and a barn located to the southwest. All 3 resources are contributing to the property's significance. Next slide, please. The house is 2.5 stories tall, 6 by 8 bays, and faces east towards Main Street. The building has a parged stone foundation, clapboard siding, and has a multi-gable roof. Fenestration primarily consists of 1/1 double-hung wood windows. The facade is dominated by a full-width porch that wraps around to the first 2 bays of the northern elevation. Much of the interior's architectural and ornamental treatments remain largely intact. Next slide, please. Built in phases between 1855 and 1900, the house initially acted as a general store with an upper floor residence. In 1875, the house was doubled in size, increasing the domestic space. In that same year, the barn was erected. In 1900, the general store was closed and converted into additional residential space. Next slide, please. About 1900, Theodore Basilan built his office as an adjacent building, seen here in the top right and bottom images, which now serves as a private residence. The Basilan property is largely intact to Theodore Basilan's circa 1900 remodeling. The barn, top left, is a remnant of a larger barn complex. Next slide, please. Theodore Basilan, shown here, was born in 1851 in Lorraine, France. He and his parents moved to Croghan in 1855, and his parents built the house being nominated. In 1861, his father passed away, and Anna Basilan, his mother, took over the dry goods store. Anna ran the family store by herself for decades, amassing a small fortune and developing a reputation as a prudent, economical businesswoman, as well as a generous supporter of the Catholic Church. The financial stability provided by Anna allowed Theodore to attend Niagara University. After graduating from college in 1873, Theodore Basilan joined his mother's business, which became known as Basilan & Son. The business continued to flourish, and this success likely gave Theodore Basilan the capital necessary to pursue outside opportunities. Next slide, please. Soon after his return to Croghan, Basilan decided to invest in the lumber industry. Following his initial success, he expanded his operations and purchased several thousand acres of forest. By 1880, he had over 200 men on his payroll, had built dams across local waterways such as Fish Creek for log drives, and cut 6 million board feet of timber annually. In 1883, he built a large sawmill at Casterland on the Beaver River, seen here, which became the center of his logging enterprise. As his timber business grew, Basilan's workforce expanded. On average, he employed over 120 men in his lumber mill, with another 300 to 400 men working as timber fellers, making him the largest single employer in Croghan. Next slide, please. In 1885, New York Governor David B. Hill selected Basilan, then only 34, to act as one of 3 commissioners for the newly organized New York State Forest Commission. Basilan's appointment was met with significant controversy, however. With 2 of the 3 commissioners from New York City, Basilan's appointment was an attempt to provide residents of the Adirondacks with representation on the commission. The Forest Commission managed state lands in the Adirondacks and Catskill Mountains. The commission promoted rules to prevent forest fires, hired men to patrol state lands in search of trespassers and illegal logging operations, and purchased land to expand the forest preserves. The commission's most important act came in 1891 when they proposed the state of New York set aside the entire Adirondack mountain region as a state park under the management of the Forest Commission. After sending men into the wilderness to survey boundaries, the Forest Commission presented the state with boundaries that define the present-day limits of the Adirondack Park, which became an NHL in 1963 and was listed in the National Register in 1966. Seen here is one of the original boundary proposals that the commission developed, which was amended ultimately to result in the final quote-unquote blue line that we have now. Next slide, please. Here we have the top photo is from the 1880s, and I believe the one on the bottom is from around 1900. In an effort to better understand Basilan's motivation for being involved with the Forest Commission, I reviewed testimony that he gave to the New York State Legislature on the Commission's activities and findings. It became clear that his view of the Adirondacks was pragmatic and focused on resource extraction, land value, and preventing needless loss of valuable timber from forest fires that often resulted from the irresponsible behavior of campers, hunters, and farmers. And during that testimony, Basilan shared his own experience with having significant acreage that he owned damaged by forest fire from a nearby farmer trying to clear land. So he had personal experience with the loss of forest from fire. Theodore Basilan lived the majority of his life in Croghan, and the Basilan House served as his home from circa 1855 until his death in 1914. This nomination was written by Matthew Schoen, and the Basilan House is privately owned, and this nomination is intended to provide the owner with access to the homeowner rehabilitation tax credit. I received one letter of support from Assemblyman Ken Blankenbush, and I know that Matt wanted to join us today, and and he has joined, and he is in our list here, folks. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak if he would like.
Hello, everyone. I guess I just want to say quickly that, thanks you to Dan for all his research in this. A lot of the supplemental research he did was really helpful, and I found really interesting, especially when it came to trying to pin down how we should talk about Basilan as, a forest commissioner, because, a lot of the contemporary sources and a lot of the historic sources really do focus on his more questionable ethical behavior, which I think is an important part of this story and an important part of, that era of New York State politics and policy making. But, I guess all I have to say after that is I had a lot of fun working on this, and, it's really good to see this house so beautifully restored by Travis and his family, and it was really a lovely time going down to Croghan to work on this project. And
thank you. Is this the property that had that porch reconstructed recently?
Yes, it is.
It did, yep.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, nicely done. Really interesting political history of the formation of the Adirondack Park in this nomination. Other guests or questions and comments from the board?
I don't believe we have any other guests today for this one.
If there are no questions or comments from the board, I would make a motion to accept this nomination if someone would like to second.
Carol Clark, I'd like to second it, Doug.
Great. Any abstaining or opposed to this nomination? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Dan. We'll move now to Jennifer Walkowski and Lily Dale.
All right, just remember to unmute myself. Good morning, everybody. I have 2 projects here for you today. We'll start with Lily Dale. The Lily Dale Assembly Historic District is significant as the first and largest spiritualist camp community in the United States. Established in 1879 and located in rural Western New York, it is one of only 4 spiritualist camps remaining in the nation. The district is eligible under Criterion A in the areas of social history and religion as a key meeting place and public face of the spiritualist movement in Western New York during the peak in the late 19th and early 20th century. Lilydale is significant at the statewide level for the role it played in the development of spiritualism. In the late 19th century, it was one of a handful of spiritualist camps in the state, the others being at Lake George, Freeville, and Oneida Lake. For those camps, it was not only the largest, but it was the only one founded by freethinkers. Today, it is the sole surviving spiritualist camp in the state. Next slide, please. The historic district reflects the development of Lilydale as it grew from a small summer campground for spiritualists to a mature permanent community. Originally named the Cassadaga Lake Free Association, Lilydale was founded as a religious community to provide a permanent campsite where spiritualists could come to vacation, picnic, worship, and commune with nature. Spiritualism served as the motivation from which the community developed, and Lilydale remains a spiritualist center today. Here we have next slide, sorry. Here we have a map showing the nominated boundaries of Lilydale. The boundaries include all property owned, purchased, and utilized during the period of significance. While the core of Lilydale is located to the west near the lake and around shared public buildings, the boundary extends east to include some wooded areas with trails and service buildings and a parcel purchased in the 1920s. Much of this parcel is not utilized or is some of it is leased for farming, but it helps provide sort of a natural buffer around the Lilydale community. Next slide. The district is also notable for its association with the Fox sisters, Kate and Maggie, who are credited with the discovery noted as the official beginning of modern spiritualism. Bored with rural life in Hydesville, New York, the sisters began to invent plots to entertain themselves, including terrifying their vulnerable mother with ghostly footsteps and bumps and thumps in the night. However, on March 31st, 1848, the girls claimed the raps that had invaded the house for the last few weeks had changed. The sounds were now responses from a ghost responding to their snaps and hand claps. Soon after, the Fox family abandoned the house in Hydesville and sent the girls to live with their sister Leah Fox Fish in Rochester. The story might have ended there, except for the fact that Rochester was a hotbed of reform and religious activity, which led to the intense interest in the girl's story, eventually giving rise to spiritualism. The Fox sisters' original home in Hydesville was moved to Lilydale in 1916 by Benjamin F. Bartlett in order to preserve the cottage as a memorial to the Fox sisters and spiritualism. It was disassembled and shipped to Buffalo, then trucked to Lilydale where it was reassembled. The cottage burned down in 1955, and the Fox Memorial Garden was created to commemorate it. Next slide. In addition to being a spiritualist center, Lilydale played an important role in support of the women's movement. Spiritualism and the women's movement were closely aligned in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sharing similar ideologies regarding individualism and women's rights. Lilydale provided a public platform to important leaders such as Susan B. Anthony and served as a major vehicle for the dispersal of women's rights advocacy throughout Western New York. This undated photo shows the women's suffrage tent, which was used to hold meetings and gatherings. Next slide. During the late 19th and into the 20th century, Lilydale offered a wide variety of spiritual, recreational, educational, and entertainment options. A nearby train station within walking distance of Lilydale brought people in from all over the state. The campus contained inns and hotels, residential cottages, as well as public buildings such as an auditorium for lectures and gatherings, a library, the Spiritualist Church or the Healing Temple, campgrounds, paths and trails, and a beach. The camp also contained a post office and even had a pet cemetery. Next slide. The nominated district is also eligible under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a largely intact example of a summer community containing a historic collection of houses, civic, religious, educational, and commercial buildings representing vernacular interpretations of popular architectural styles in the late 19th and early to mid 20th century Western New York. Next slide. The period of significance begins with Lilydale's inception in 1879 with the initial purchase of land and ends in 1955 with the construction of the Healing Temple, the last significant religious architectural building associated with the Lilydale Assembly. The spiritualist movement and religion experienced a decline after World War II, as did Lilydale. Many of the cottages were abandoned and the assembly put them up for auction for their price of their delinquent fees. Coinciding with a changing perspective on religion in America in the 1950s, the construction of the temple was a turning point. With an improved economy, the baby boom ensued and religion grew, once again solidifying Lilydale as a strong spiritualist community. Today is a thriving community and home to roughly 275 people. With a large gathering of 52 mediums, Lilydale has maintained a steady stream of over 22,000 visitors per season over the last 2 decades. Next slide. So we have received no letters of objection, and we have 1 email of support from an owner. I'm not sure if we have on the call Shelley Takei. Shelley,
Yes.
are you there? Okay, great.
Yes,
Shelley
I
was
am.
Shelley, did you want?
Raising my hand.
Great. Shelley was part of the Lilydale Board of Directors National Register Committee and instrumental in leading the charge on the nomination. Shelley, did you want to add anything?
I think you're doing a fabulous job, Jennifer. I just think it's going to mean so much to Lilydale. It's such a poor community, it really is. And just the idea, that we're going to be able to apply for grants, it's just going to mean so much. Also, the homeowners tax credit. It's thrilling to see that we've gotten this far.
Great, thank you so much, Shelley. So this is the Lilydale Assembly Historic District. Are there any questions on this project?
Questions or comments from the board? Really great nomination. Hello?
This is Kristen. Can you hear me?
I think it was a great nomination, and I'm a little surprised it wasn't already on the register.
Yes.
It's been sort of a project that's floated around in our office for many years, and we were just kind of waiting for, the right movement to kind of take traction. So, yeah, everybody's kind of happy to see this happen.
Yeah, certainly. I'd be happy to nominate it.
This is Kristen. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Kristen.
Hey, thanks. I also wanted to commend the nomination. I particularly appreciated some of the buildings had little history notes, so it was really great to help understand how specific buildings connected to the history of the community through those notes. And my one question is, as the sort of birth of modern spiritualism, why would this not be a national significance?
I had a sense that that question would come up. It was definitely something we looked at. Just for the present project, given the sort of time and budget limitations, we didn't have enough opportunity to really more fully develop a national context for spiritualism and spiritualist camps. Again, it's something that could be explored down the road with an amendment. We did feel that there was enough information to support a statewide argument, but it would need a bit more context in order to really support a national level argument, we felt.
Thank you for that. And if there was, did I hear Jen, if Jen was nominating, I'm happy to be the second if we're at that point.
Yes, I believe we are. Thank you, Kristen. Jen, do you have any sense of how this measures up nationally with other spiritualist movement sites? There were, you said there were 4 in New York.
Again, that's not, we weren't really able to dive deeply into kind of placing it in the pantheon of other spiritualist centers around the country. They did do quite a bit of research and put it into a statewide context, which is excellent, but it would take a bit more research and interpretation and analysis in order to really nationally contextualize it.
Understood. Thank you.
I can say that Lilydale is the largest center for the religion of spiritualism.
Nationwide?
In the world.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, very good. Any other questions from the board? Any objections or abstentions? The motion carries by unanimous consent. Well done.
Great,
Moving
thank
on.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to Fetters.
So now we go back to my bread and butter type of project here. So the Fetters Manufacturing Company factory is locally significant as the longtime location of the Fetters Manufacturing Company, which specialized in manufacturing automobile radiators before becoming nationally known for their air conditioning products. Located on Tonawanda Street, just north of Niagara Street in Buffalo, the Fetters Manufacturing Company factory reflects the area's industrial character as a primary manufacturing center for transportation-related industries in the early 20th century. As an excellent example of this company's history and patterns of development throughout time, the historic complex reflects the manufacturing boom that occurred in relationship to transportation-oriented development located along Tonawanda Street during the early 20th century. Associated with the MPDF for Historic Resources of the Black Rock Planning Neighborhood in Buffalo, the factory demonstrates many of the same themes, architectural styles, and historic uses that were typical of this area during the early 19th century. Next slide, please. The buildings are significant under Criterion A in the area of industry for their association with the history of the important Fetters Manufacturing Company, where they served as the factory complex for the family-run company that produced automobile radiators and cooling units. The two buildings in the complex were constructed for the Fetters Manufacturing Company, initially founded by Theodore C. Fetters at a different location in 1896. This company was one of the most successful businesses of its kind in the nation. Constructed largely between 1907 and 1928, the building served as the company's headquarters for producing, assembling, and distributing products like automobile radiators for the majority of the company's history. During both World Wars, the Fetters Manufacturing Company also produced several weapons and other items for the United States government in these buildings. The complex was used to manufacture of these products before they were distributed to automobile companies, the government, and other consumers nationwide. Today, the buildings remain as a good example of an industrial factory complex used for this purpose. The period of significance begins in 1907 when the Fetters Manufacturing Company moved into the newly constructed three-story main factory building at 5771 Tonawanda Street. This period also encompasses the construction of several additions to that building in 1910, 1915, 1923, and 1927-28. The year 1945 marks the end of the period of significance when the Fetters Manufacturing Company merged to form the Fetters Quinen Corporation. This merger dissolved the original family ownership of the company and also shifted manufacturing methods and production lines. So we can go to the next slide. This view shows the rear east elevations of the buildings, showing its relationship and proximity to the Scajaquada Creek. Here you're looking, I think, west, southwest. Next slide. The Fetters Manufacturing Company factory consists of two buildings, the main factory building and offices, and the warehouse. The main factory and the offices building is located in the top photo, and you can see it sort of to the left in the middle photo, and then the warehouse building is in the lower photo. The main factory was constructed in three phases. The three-story portion of the brick building was constructed in 1907 and 1910, while the four-story portion to the south was constructed in 1915. The two-story portion of this building to the south along West Avenue was constructed in 1923. A steel water tower is located to the west on the roof of the four-story addition. A portion of the roof is missing in the 1915 addition to the third floor, and some of the third floor has collapsed onto the second floor. The warehouse, located to the south along West Avenue, was constructed between 1926 and 28 and has corrugated steel cladding along the east elevation and brick along the west elevation. In 1988, the single-story portion to the south was repaired using concrete block and corrugated steel after suffering fire damage. So we can go to the next slide. The building has sat vacant since the early 2000s, leading to some deterioration. However, despite these losses, the building retains sufficient integrity to convey the significance of the Fetters Company, retaining most of the major manufacturing areas, offices, and storage areas critical to factory use. Here are some representative interior views of the building. So we do have an approved Part 1 for the Fetters factory, and the main factory is slated for rehabilitation and reuse. This is the Fetters Manufacturing Company. Are there any questions on this one?
So this is Criterion A only, and I assume that C is not included because of the lack of integrity of the overall building structure?
Because of the loss of some of the areas which have collapsed, yes. This was being nominated solely for the association with the Fetters Company, which was a very significant company.
Yeah. And do you know what the plan is for this structure?
I can't recall what the current plans are. My assumption is apartments of some sort.
Yeah, it would be really nice to see a building in this part of Black Rock get rehabilitated and brought back to some modern functional use. It's a pretty dilapidated part of town.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments about Fetters? Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Wayne. Sorry, Carol, you go ahead and make the motion, and this is Wayne. I would second Carol's motion.
Thank you, Wayne.
Yes, I'd like to move the item both as a native of Detroit and also a decades-long member of the Society for Industrial Archaeology.
Excellent. Any abstained or opposed? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you, Jennifer. Next up is Virginia Bartos and her 3 nominations.
Good morning. My first 2 presentations are related, with the first being the architecture of James H. Johnson in the greater Rochester area, 1961 to 1977. It's a multiple property document form. Just to recap on an MPDF, it gives a context to important resources that are too scattered to be listed as a district or some other cohesive unit, and a way to be related to the document when listed. As stated by the National Park Service, the MPDF is a cover document for resources that represent a common theme, trend, or pattern of history. In this case, the MPDF documents the work of Rochester architect James H. Johnson during his most productive and creative years. Since the majority of his work was done in Monroe, Ontario, and Wayne counties, with some fewer projects in Livingston and Genesee counties, the document's geographic area is amorphously defined as the greater Rochester area. Here we see Mr. Johnson in front of one of his most recognized works, the Antil Whitman House, more commonly known as the Mushroom House in Parrington, completed in 1969. The other buildings seen here are an interior view of Temple Sinai in Brighton, the Leaf House in Victor, and St. John the Evangelist Church in Greece. The Johnson MPDF is largely an edited version of a survey of his work completed by Katie Eggers-Como and Christopher Brandt in 2018, with funding from the Town of Greece, the Preservation League of New York State, and the New York State Council on the Arts, along with assistance from architectural historian Gina DeBella, the Johnson family, and the Landmark Society of Western New York. Next slide, please. The survey goes into more detail about Johnson's life and work, but much of that is captured in the MPDF. For example, both documents discuss influences on his design, a major one being the organic architecture of Bruce Goff, who taught at what is now Oklahoma State University. One of Goff's famous designs was the 1955 Bavinger House in Norman, Oklahoma, in the upper left, sadly no longer extant. To the right is Johnson's St. Christopher Church in Chili, built 1970, and an interior view of the house he designed for his daughter Betsy in 2011 in Victor. And I think you can clearly see the connection in these images. Next slide, please. One of the themes described in the document is Johnson's integration of modern art and architecture and a collaboration with artists. The image on the left shows his collaboration with metal sculptor Carl Zoller and the design for an Altiers shoe store, and Altiers had several stores in the Rochester area. The image on the right is a ceramic sculpture designed by artist Kurt Feuerholm, which was installed in Our Lady of Mercy Parish Hall in 1961 in Greece. Next slide, please. Johnson's creative work falls into 2 major categories defined as the organic sculptural, and the organic geometric, and both I think are self-explanatory. This slide shows 3 of his many examples of the organic sculptural that are each based on the site, natural forms, and the client's needs, so that it would be specific to its time, place, and owner. On the left is Temple Sinai in Brighton, built 1965 and 1966. The upper right is the Schwartz House in Pittsford, built 1968-1969. And below it is the Hofel Ski Chalet in Naples, built in 1969. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of his organic geometric designs. Again, these were designed with the site and the needs of the client in mind. characteristics of these designs are complicated massing and roof lines, complex forms created by unusual angles, repetition of shapes, and the use of cantilevers. The house in the top left was built in 1972 in Victor. The top right was built around 1971 in Brighton, and the lower two are in Pittsford. The Altier House on the left, built in 1977, and the Connor House on the right, built in 1968. Next slide, please. It's probably an understatement to say that James Johnson was a hands-on type person. You can see him in the lower left in 2002, working on an addition to the Antel Whitman house. In the 1960s, Johnson experimented with earth-formed concrete construction, where compacted earth molds were formed on site, concrete poured in and left to set, and then the forms were lifted into place. The process was actually more involved than what I described, but I just wanted to give you the highlights. Here we see the formed panels being lifted into place for St. Januarius Church in Naples, and the images on the right show one of the earth form molds for the Antel Whitman house and a form section being set into place. Next slide, please. Last but not least is multifamily housing, another theme in the MPDF. As stated in the document, Johnson had 10 commissions for such projects between 1966 and 1973. And although they fall into their own category, you can see some characteristic features such as the mansard-style roofs, multiple roof lines, and a clear association with the setting or the site. These projects show a formalist approach, probably his solution to economize on construction costs and maintenance needs. I thought I'd leave you with Johnson's elevation drawings for the 1968 ProFac Cooperative Seasonal Workers Housing in Bergen. As I said, the MPDF is pretty much a Reader's Digest condensed version of the survey, so if you want more information about James H. Johnson, the survey is available, and I understand that a publication on Johnson is either on the way or completed. Johnson was clearly an interesting and talented man whose work now seems to be growing in appreciation. Any questions or comments?
I would just comment that the diversity and sheer magnitude of the number of buildings that he constructed in his lifetime is just amazing. Other questions or comments from the board? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Wayne Goodman. I just wanted to, first of all, say this is an incredible project, great nomination. And I wanted to express my appreciation to particularly Katie Como and Chris Brandt and Gina DeBella. They've just been champions of this architect, and I think it's just a wonderful thing. This is moving forward. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Virginia, do you have? Does anyone want to speak? I thought
I'm going to invite them to speak after I do the next one.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to approve this nomination?
This is Wayne. I would make that motion.
Do we have a second?
This is Erica. I'll second.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, at least one resource needs to be nominated for listing along with the MPDF for it to be accepted by the National Park Service. In this case, I feel privileged to present to you the architect's own residence in Penfield. Yes, it is a second residence. The first residence still exists, but has been significantly altered and I believe currently operates as a daycare. Built in 1975, the nominated property is clearly eligible under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an outstanding and highly intact example of Johnson's organic sculptural design, with its stucco finished walls, dramatic roofline, and curved exterior. Next slide, please. Behind the house is a former golf course, now a town-designated nature preserve, and it's the east elevation that benefits from the natural setting and scenic view. As you can see, the house is actually 2 stories with only 1 floor visible from the public roadway, a common feature of Johnson's residential designs and one that you can also see in several of Bruce Goff's works. As stated in the nomination, the curving roof adds privacy from the neighboring house, and the concrete construction allows for large placement of windows on the more private side, literally using an old A.J. Downing idea of bringing nature into the house. The drawing on the right is the site plan schematic for the property. Next slide, please. As with organic design, everything was part of the architect's vision, both interior and exterior. Here we see Johnson's plans for interior details, including the kitchen. He added interior spaces such as a music studio for Sarah, an accomplished cellist and music teacher who trained at the Eastman School of Music. The view from the kitchen is seen here from the 2015 real estate listing that shows the historic kitchen and the sunroom with its triangular skylights. Next slide, please.
Wow.
Here are two views of the entry, one historic and one current. The door was handmade by Johnson, as were the curved railings made out of laminated oak. I told you he was a hands-on person. Next slide, please. This is the bedroom over the garage, a space redone shortly after the house was completed. Like many of the second floor bedrooms, the ceilings follow the curves of the roof and the walls are undecorated plaster. Next slide, please. Here we have Sarah and James H. Johnson in front of the fireplace in the ceramic sculpture designed by Marguerite Antell. The Johnsons sold the house to the present owners, who recognized the creative skill of a talented architect like James Johnson and are lovingly caring for the house. I'm also greatly indebted to owner Mary Bayer for drafting this nomination, as I would be perplexed as to how to begin to describe the house. She did a terrific job with drafting the nomination, which made my part of the editing much easier. Mary is a guest at this meeting along with Christopher Brandt and Katie Como, authors of the survey, and Gina DeBella, who assisted with the research and sorting through the treasure trove of Johnson materials. I understand that Chris would like to make some comments, but before I turn the presentation over to him, I would like to add that we have two letters of support for the house, one from New York State Assembly member Jennifer Lunsford, and the other from the Town of Penfield Historic Preservation Board. Chris? Yes, no, maybe?
Yep. Can everyone hear me? Yes?
I can hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, great. So in regards to both the nominations, I just wanted to reiterate sort of our team's thanks for the immense amount of support that we got, both financially as well as through multiple staff members at New York State SHPO, and then sort of friends and colleagues of the firm and in the community, the multiple staff of the Landmark Society. Really was a sort of team and collaborative effort to bring our project to fruition, and then to now finally, sort of see this very, in some ways, this sort of last step to really get Johnson's work into a permanent, a permanent state and national record. I think it's great to have seen this essentially starting from way back when I first met him in 2010 as a student, beginning to become interested in and doing research on his career during undergrad and graduate school, and then having the great privilege to work with my former colleague Katie Como and Gina DeBella for the year and a half that we did the survey project, then to work again with Gina to reformat the book for publishing by the Greece Historical Society earlier this year, and then getting the Docomomo Modernism in America citation award here just a couple months ago for the project, and then now to have the great privilege to be working with our clients Mary and Christopher Bayer, the new owners, loving owners and stewards of Johnson's personal home, who have really should be congratulated for making this final effort to really get over the finish line, and to lovingly care for this very special home. So thank you to everyone. There's so many people to thank, but it's a really great honor and very exciting to finally see this final step be accomplished.
Thank you. Nicely said. Other questions or comments from the board? Any other guest speakers? Do I hear a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. This is Gretchen Soren.
Gretchen Soren, I'll second that. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. And Virginia, now on to Elle, Wanger, and Barry.
Oh, yes. Now for something completely different. My final presentation is the Elle, Wanger, and Barry building in Rochester, Monroe County. In addition to this being a nomination, the nominated property is also a federal commercial tax credit project that received its Part 1 approval. The Elle, Wanger, and Barry building is an 8-story office building designed by Brockett and Warner and built in 1888. It's located in the historic Four Corners area of Rochester, and you may recall that a few years ago, the board considered an expansion and amendment to the Powers Building, one of the most recognized buildings in the Four Corners. By the time of the Elle, Wanger, and Barry building's construction, the area was well on its way to becoming a premier location for offices. This is reflected in the 1897 renovation of the building's storefronts to accommodate a bank with the redesign done by Rochester architect Claude Bragdon, and I believe that you can see that in the left-hand slide. The bank offices were remodeled again for a bank in 1931 by the local firm of Crandall and Strobel, and once more in 1948 by the Veterans Administration for offices and medical services. The current appearance is seen on the right and is a result of a 1984 renovation. Even with these changes, the building is eligible for its architecture. Next slide, please. Another part of the 1984 renovation was enclosing an interior atrium of glass, but you can still look out of the exterior windows at the interior atrium space. The building has always functioned as an office building and retains much of its historic configuration and a large amount of historic fabric. As you can see in the lower image, the windows have original sills and moldings, and drop ceilings hide the original plaster ceilings. Next slide, please. This slide shows 2 lobby spaces, with the image on the left showing the historic marble wainscoting, elevator enframement, marble stairs, and Cutler mail chute, which I should say was invented in Rochester. The image on the right shows the openness of the main entrance and the encased historic support posts. Next slide, please. Other extant features are window panels, fireplaces in some rooms, and more ornate historic staircases. The building was commissioned by the Elle, Wanger, and Barry Real Estate Company as an offshoot of the Elle, Wanger, and Barry Nurseries, no pun intended, the largest nursery business in Rochester. The building is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of community development for being part of the transformation of the historic Four Corners area, and Criterion C as a representative work of a new type of building, namely the high-rise office building, and for being an excellent example of the design of Warner and Brockett. The nomination was prepared by Preservation Studios of Buffalo, New York, and is also the consultant for the tax credit project. Questions or comments?
Questions or comments from the board? Any guest speakers?
I don't believe I have any guest speakers on this.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve? Is the, I have a quick question here. Period of significance, 1888 to 1973. Is that less than 50 years or just not really?
It's close enough.
Yeah, close enough. All right. And this loss of the storefronts on the first floor do not impact the architecture overall.
No.
Yeah. I'll move. I'll make a motion. Do I hear a second?
This is Jay. I'll second.
Any abstain or opposed? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Are people interested in taking a 5-minute break at this time before Jennifer Betzworth starts?
Sure.
I call for a 5-minute break. It is 11:23. We'll come back at 11:28.
Thank you. This Bruce Goff knockoff thing was amazing. This Bruce Goff knockoff thing, this guy did like 10 buildings in Timbuktu, and he knew through his stuff and admired him. And one of the demolished
Okay, getting ready to call the meeting back to order. Kathy, if you could just make sure we have a quorum. I know it's dangerous to take a break, but I think people appreciate it.
Yep, we are checking. We're waiting for Daniel to come back too, so give us another minute or so. Thank you. I will let you know.
Okay, I have 11:28. We can call the meeting back to order. Jennifer, are you ready?
Yep, looks like we have everyone.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
I'm ready if you guys are.
All right, Jennifer Betzworth will lead us off with Elaine Kooning House and Studio. Thank you.
All right. I'm excited to share this one with you today. So the Elaine Kooning House and Studio is locally significant under Criterion B in the area of art for its association with Elaine Kooning, her late career, and her involvement with the community of expressionist artists in Springs and East Hampton. It is exceptionally significant as the place that she lived and worked for the longest duration during her productive career. Next. Elaine Kooning played a major role in the development of abstract expressionism, the first fully American modern art movement. She is considered among the first generation of female abstract expressionist painters and a member of the New York School in conjunction with famous male contemporaries, such as her husband, Willem de Kooning, pictured here, and fellow artists Mark Rothko, Franz Klein, and Jackson Pollock. Next. Elaine focused on portraits as a way to insert herself into the contemporary debate about abstraction versus representational painting. In her series, which she later referred to as The Faceless Man, Elaine intentionally broke with the tradition that women only painted women. She aimed to paint men as sex objects, focusing on pose and body language and abstracting their faces. Next. After Willem and Elaine separated in 1957, Elaine established a studio in New York City, took on a series of teaching positions, and continued to experiment with abstraction and portraiture. In her critically acclaimed Burgers of Amsterdam Avenue, she used gesture and color to depict 9 young men of different races. Next. In 1962, Elaine received a commission to paint an official portrait of John F. Kennedy for the Truman Library. After spending several weeks doing live sketches and paintings, she continued to refine the work, which received a solo exhibition in 1964 and 65. Next. During the late 1960s, Elaine started spending more time on Long Island with the financial assistance of Willem de Kooning. In 1975, she purchased this property as a dedicated home and studio. While the couple reconciled, they continued to maintain separate homes and studios. Next. Elaine had this dedicated studio building, which is attached to the house, constructed in 1978. The greater financial and geographic stability during this last period of Elaine's life allowed her the time to explore new artistic ideas. Next. During her late career, when she lived and worked here, Elaine experimented with new themes and series, engaged with the local community of abstract artists, and gained increasing recognition for her current and earlier work. Next. In particular, she combined abstraction with mythology, primitive imagery, and realism. She created her 2 most well-known series, Cave Paintings and Bacchus, during this period. High Wall, a triptych 9 feet wide and almost 20 feet high, is considered by many to be her masterpiece, and that's pictured at the bottom of the slide. Next. We can move to the next slide. Her Bacchus series, which an image from that you see on the left, which was inspired by a statue at the Jardin de Luxembourg, were colorful, lyrical, and muscular meditations on a twisting form. Next. Elaine also continued to paint portraits. While she did most of her work indoors, she also utilized different areas of her property. Her sittings for Pele were held outdoors on her deck, as Pele is not a studio man. Next. I've got some images of the interior here. We'll move on to the next one for another view. And with this image of the interior as a portrait of Aladar Marburger, who's a former student and friend of hers, that was created in her living room. Next. And there's an image of the studio today on the interior. Next. So Elaine was active in the local art community in Springs, and Oshawa Hall, which you see there, is a local community center, held its first artist exhibition in 1968. That show, which Willem de Kooning helped to found, became an annual show known for highlighting regional modern artists. Elaine participated in many events at the hall, including a Women in the Arts series in 1975, and designed the poster for the exhibition in 1985 that you see there. Next. While early female abstract expressionists did not receive the same critical attention as their male counterparts during their lifetimes, Elaine's significant role has been increasingly recognized since her death in 1989. Her house is now used as an event, exhibit, and residency space to honor her legacy. The nomination draft for this one was written by Karen Kennedy of Preservation Studios, And we have a letter of support from Assembly Member Fred Thiele Jr. And the owner of the property, Chris Byrne, is present at the meeting today. Chris, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the nomination?
Yeah, sure. First, thank you everyone for inviting me to the meeting, and and Jennifer, thank you for putting all this together. I just kind of want to support some of the things you were saying. I mean, I think as when I was a young art student, the idea of visiting an artist where they worked and all was such an important pilgrimage. And I think Elaine is increasingly becoming sort of a central figure, maybe a peripheral figure initially, but one of the things that's very under-recognized about her is she was a critic for Art News in 1948 and really mapped that generation, generation post-war American paintings, and made critical arguments for them. And as you mentioned, Jennifer, her teaching posts. So yeah, I think it's the history is building, and since she did do so many different things and was so generous, we're kind of catching up, I guess. She also, I think, in terms of the mentioning the artists visiting, we love to have artists come out, and increasingly projects are about the house. We had a concert. We worked with Guildhall in East Hampton, the museum there. So I'd like to think in terms of those collaborative efforts, it's consistent with Elaine's generous spirit during her lifetime and with the artists that she knew.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was great. Questions or comments from the board about the nomination?
This is Kristen, and I actually have two, if I can frame them quickly. Jennifer, I noticed that there's a couple nominations in this grouping, not necessarily both yours, so forgive me, whose period of significance begins less than 50 years. And so my first question is whether you, or forgive me for putting you on the spot, someone else could just frame, like for the record, the conditions under which a nomination that's a little bit less than 50 years old is allowed, if you will. And my second question is that I felt like the nomination was really building the significance of the artist, someone whose role has maybe not been as prominently presented, the role of women in abstract expressionism. And is there, I guess, why is this not a nationally significant nomination, or is there a way to frame that? So that's my two questions, is the just a quick summary on how a site less than 50 years old can be nominated, and the question about national significance for this one.
So for this case, those questions get a little bit intertwined. So those are very thoughtful. Thank you. So the period of significance for this property is, yes, entirely within after that this 50-year period. So 1975 to 1989. That because of that, we do have to make an argument that the property is exceptionally significant. So that requires a little bit more work to show that this period of her life is especially important, and more effort to make that argument, even within the context of what the level of significance is. So because that period of significance was such a push and entirely beyond that 50-year cutoff, it was a bit of a strategic decision to focus on the local significance of the property and really emphasize Elaine's impact and role within the local community. I don't think that there's any question that she is a figure of national significance, and that possibly this nomination could be revisited and expanded in the future to make an argument for national significance. But from a strategic perspective, if we can avoid having to make a case for exceptional significance and national significance at the same time, sometimes we try to do that, if that makes sense.
It does.
Just in terms
Thank
of
you
the
so
burden,
much.
we would rather recognize her this way and come back and add more than shoot for the moon and miss.
I really appreciate that. I understand that very clearly. Thank you so much. I'm happy to move the nomination unless someone else has questions.
Other questions and comments from the board? Or a second?
I'll second it. This is Gretchen Soren.
Great, thank you. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
John Jackson, 2.
Okay, so we'll move to a different aspect of Long Island's history with the John Jackson II house. It is locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a rare surviving early house updated over 200 years. The building preserves the original 18th century construction, a large Greek Revival addition, and late 19th and early 20th century modifications. Next. Originally one of several houses built along both sides of Wantagh Avenue associated with the Jackson family, this house is one of only 2 standing today. The other house, also located on Wantagh Avenue, was listed in 2006. Both retain evidence of their 18th century origins and evolution over time, and both do have these big Greek Revival additions. Next. So this is sort of the funny side of the house, but it shows us the additions and changes most clearly. So we're going to spend a little time looking at it here. It retains the structural evidence and form of a mid-18th century period dwelling in its sort of left-hand section. So you see the kitchen and dining room with, I can't move the pointer that you see, but the kitchen and dining room with that central chimney mass is associated with the earliest portion of the house. And then the dining room hall and parlor expansion is associated with the Greek Revival additions. And then the porch and the enclosures and some interior changes are all associated with 20th century additions and changes to update the house. The house is additionally significant under criterion A in the area of settlement for its long association with the Jacksons, an early and prominent family in Wantagh. John Jackson II played an important role in building the community through his work as a farmer, mill owner, and through his association with the free Black community of the Brush. Next. The Jackson family owned the property until 1899, and the house bore witness to family tragedies, including a murder by Loyalist militia and successes such as the election of Thomas Birdsall Jackson as a state and national representative. Next. After passing through a few families, the house was purchased by Charles Bradley, a writer and playwright, and the most significant 20th century architectural changes are attributed to his ownership. And so here you see a little bit of that blend of the Greek Revival additions to the house. So we have this great Greek Revival surround for the door here on the left, but that large beveled plate glass window and the plate glass windows on the bay window are associated with Bradley. So you're seeing a little bit of both. Next, we'll go inside. There's that beautiful Greek Revival stair. And then the columns you see, that's associated with Bradley's ownership, updating the house, opening things up, and that's associated with new changes in heating. It wouldn't have been possible before, and then it creates this grand entryway. Next. And there's another image of the parlors and those 20th century changes. Next. Moving upstairs, there's a Greek Revival mantelpiece. And you can see some other details in the room. So the draft for this nomination was written by the owner, Beth Oberg, and Zachary Studenroth. And that is the John Jackson II house. Are there any questions on this one?
Questions or comments from the board? Any guests?
Beth is here, but she did not express an interest in speaking.
That's fine.
So.
Really fascinating history. It's nice to have the full story about the murder and the results of the perpetrators spelled out in the nomination. Really, really fascinating reading. It really, it's the history of our nation is sort of encapsulated in this nomination. It's quite interesting. Do I hear a motion?
This is Lucy. I'm glad to nominate it.
And a second?
Let me pass.
Hi, this is Wayne. I'll second.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Ridgewood?
All right, on to my last project for you today. The Ridgewood Fresh Pond Road Myrtle Avenue Historic District is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its cohesive collection of small-scale, mixed-use buildings constructed in a relatively short span of time. And the map shows the district that is proposed today, but what it doesn't show is that it's entirely surrounded by existing predominantly residential historic districts that were nominated in 1983 as part of the Ridgewood Multiple Resource Area. So this project is a little bit of coming back and recognizing that the commercial areas in this community are significant and are valuable as well. So next. Next slide. There we are. Ridgewood developed rapidly in the early 20th century, once fast and inexpensive rapid transit brought the area into close connection to the business districts of Brooklyn and Manhattan. This row, the first to be constructed in the district, was completed in 1906, the same year the Myrtle Avenue Elevated was completed. Next. Residential development predominated in the neighborhood, and several previously listed districts recognize that. This district focuses on the area's larger and busier streets, which developed into commercial thoroughfares. The rapidity at which Ridgewood developed, primarily between 1906 and 1925, led to a notably cohesive building stock. The period of significance for the district extends to 1960 to include significant commercial alterations through the mid-century. Next. Fresh Pond Road and Myrtle Avenue were built up primarily with three-story store and flats buildings containing storefronts on the ground floor and apartments on the upper stories. The businesses tended to be small-scale retail establishments catering to a local clientele, and many of them still are that. Next. Developers marketed these buildings to aspiring homeowners who could rent out both the storefront and one of the apartments and cover their mortgage. Census research suggests that this approach was successful for at least some owners. Initially, most of the buildings were designed in the Renaissance Revival style, as you were seeing in some of the earlier slides, but by the 19-teens, architects began using a broader palette, which included Colonial Revival, Mediterranean Revival, and arts and crafts details. Next. This district also includes a handful of exclusively residential buildings. Two-family, two-story row houses like these are typical of the area. Next. Both Fresh Pond Road and Myrtle Avenue predate the Ridgewood street grid. Myrtle Avenue cuts across the primary grid, creating numerous angled intersections, which led to the erection of several flatiron-shaped buildings in the district. This is just a handful of them. It's kind of interesting. Next. In addition to the speculatively built row buildings, there are a number of notable individual buildings within the district. Banks are most prominent, like the Ridgewood Savings Bank and the Upper Corner, but the district also includes a theater, school, and a church. Next. And we'll end here at the World War I Memorial, which was constructed in 1923 at the height of the area's development to commemorate the 110 local service members who died in the conflict. The memorial was relatively recently recognized in a comprehensive inventory of military monuments in the city as the finest war memorial in Queens and one of the most beautiful in the city. The draft was written by Christopher Brzee, and his survey of the neighborhood, which led to the identification of this district, and the nomination was supported by a Preserve New York grant. We have a letter of support from New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and we've received 6 letters of objection. There's about 400 owners in the district. Are there any questions on this nomination?
I have a question. I think of this as a flying V in shape. And so why was the commercial core ignored when all of these other districts were being formulated? Was it just not respected as historically significant at the time?
So I wasn't around 40 years ago, but I've heard and I understand that at that time there was a lot of hesitation around the fact that the storefronts had been changed out. And storefronts are changed. That's how businesses remain viable. That's how commercial areas exist. It would be remarkable to find any commercial core that doesn't have changed storefronts. And so I think some of that is perhaps too tightly holding to an idea about that storefronts as being particularly important in terms of integrity.
Right.
And I think that when you look through the rest of the neighborhood and you see these buildings, you see that, yes, they're the same kinds of styles you see in the residential area with this different variation, and they are in large part quite intact on the upper stories. You can still read it. So in some ways, we're correcting a wrong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Doug, this is Kath, and I was around 40 years ago, and Jennifer's exactly right. And the staff recommendation was to make one large district of Ridgewood because it was also consistent.
Yeah.
However, at the time, there were other people on the staff were very opposed to the storefront alterations. So as a result, we had 18 smaller districts created to exclude these areas. And so I'm very grateful that the sponsor and Jennifer have come back to write this oversight, because you see how intact they still are, the cornices and everything.
Yes.
So yeah, this should have been one large district that many years ago.
Thank you for that. And certainly some of the strengths of the nomination are the explanation of storefronts and the great explanation of contributing and non-contributing structures and buildings.
And the very next district that we did in Sunset Park, Myrtle, Hesh, and I decided that we would insist that it be one large district, and it was an extremely large district. So
thank you.
That's the background.
Good. Much appreciated.
This is Wint. I think the district research was wonderfully well done by Chris Brzee, and his photographs are terrific. It really is a very persuasive presentation, and I'm happy to move it.
Do I hear a second? Well, I'll second it. Any opposed or abstained? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to Linda Mackey and the John James Audubon houses.
All right. Good morning. Yep, it's still morning. So John James Audubon houses located in the Hamilton Heights neighborhood of Manhattan. It's a public housing high-rise designed by architects Charles Greenberg and Marvin Ames and completed in 1962. The building is significant at the local level under Criterion A in the area of politics and government as a representative example of early vest pocket or scattered site housing developed by the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA. Next slide. The earliest vest pocket housing developments were conceived in the 1950s as NYCHA sought alternative, less destructive means of providing affordable housing units in the city. It was a direct response to the issues resulting from superblock or campus-style complexes, namely large-scale demolition and tenant displacement. As a result, NYCHA turned to vest pocket housing, which originally consisted of infill or small pocket developments, typically smaller than a full city block. Vest pocket developments by design required little demolition and minimal tenant displacement, targeting underutilized or vacant properties. The earliest examples, of which Audubon houses was the first to be completed, consisted of isolated housing towers similar in design to those located in those superblock developments. Next slide. Although Audubon Houses was constructed using state funding, the building's design adheres to federal guidelines for public housing established in the mid-20th century. Federal guidance emphasized minimum costs associated with design, materials, and construction. The practicality and efficiency of the design of Audubon is directly in alignment with these guidelines. Greenberg and Ames's simple design utilizes an alternating pattern of slightly recessed and protruding bays as a means of maximizing sunlight on the interior. Additionally, the architects incorporated simple brick cladding on the exterior that not only lacks ornament but also appropriately blends the building into its surrounding neighborhood. The building's concrete structure also plays a key role in its durability and cost efficiency. By its nature, the concrete tower is fireproof, a key element to any multifamily building. On the interior, Audubon Houses maintains its simplicity of design with finishes that include quarry tile and asphalt tile floors, glazed tile walls, and painted concrete ceilings. Next slide. Between 1962 and 1968, about 24 vest pocket housing towers were constructed in a similar manner. By 1966, however, criticisms of this early vest pocket design paired with the Model Cities program resulted in a new form of vest pocket housing that saw an even smaller scale approach that included the rehabilitation of existing buildings. Audubon Houses serves as an excellent representation of NYCHA's initial vest pocket housing concept. The site chosen for the building was largely undeveloped and little to no displacement occurred as a result, highlighting NYCHA's goal of housing more people than it displaced. Furthermore, the building's design illustrates the isolated tower in the park form that dominated early vest pocket designs. Audubon Houses retains integrity and marks an important stage in the history of public housing in New York City. The building has remained in use as affordable housing, and the period of significance is 1961 to 1962, inclusive of the period of construction. We have a Part 1 commercial tax credit approval from the National Park Service, and we also have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. And today we have Aaron Ward and I think Michael LaFlash with Heritage Consulting Group, the consultants who prepared the nomination. Aaron or Michael, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Michael was unable to join us, so I'm just here to answer any questions. But really, I just want to thank Linda and Kath so much for their assistance on this nomination. It's representative of a really important, part of the politics and social history of the city. So really appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from the board about the John James Audubon Houses?
Yeah, I have to say that aside from it looking like the interior of a prison, I think that it's the nomination reads in such a positive way, as if all these projects were such positive. Like the history seems to be a little bit skewed to me about projects like this in a positive way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In the way the architecture is described as well.
This is Kath Gretchen, and that's a very good point to make. And I think that the position taken by the preparers was that the New York City Housing Authority was trying to do something positive. It didn't go so far as to evaluate whether it did have a positive effect or not. They didn't really go on into the social history of it. They were the towers and the big complexes of towers in the park were being severely criticized. And this was one attempt to do something different, which is to separate them and put them on scattered sites where they'd have a little bit of breathing room. However, they were still tall and, they, as you say, the inside looks like a prison. And they were also criticized. There were about, I think, 28 of these. And, as one of the articles said, what was it, Linda? They were like a sardine can.
Yep, tall sardine can.
And so they didn't last very long. About these 28 were built. And very soon after that, they went to this, what was really the Vest Pocket program of small scale buildings in neighborhoods that also used existing buildings. And Linda has one coming up in March that is also a NYSHA project. So I guess in the nomination, we probably didn't address that enough because, as you say, they were trying to present a positive picture. And I will say that it caused us a little bit of consternation, and it caused NPS a little bit of consternation. And they kind of said they don't really want to see a lot of these come to them. So I guess I don't really have a good answer, except that we were going toward what they aspired to, not necessarily.
Well, you know, when they built Eastern State Penitentiary, they aspired to rehabilitate the convicts, and what they did was drive them mad. I don't think anyone would write that up and say, well, you know, we're writing about what they aspired to, not what the ultimate effect was.
Right. And so we probably should have asked the consultants to address that a little bit more in the nomination, but it has a very, very narrow context.
Okay.
And NPS did accept it after a lot of back and forth and a lot of revisions. Linda and I found a dissertation on the subject. So you're absolutely right. But we didn't really pursue the whole social history, and perhaps we should have.
Okay.
Kath, this is Wint. You know, so many of these nominations, we have very positive comments from the owner. The owners often are the people, the proponents of the nomination. In this case, here's a building that's 50 years old or more, almost 60 years old now. It's still fully occupied. And I don't know whether there is a residence committee in a building like this, but it would be kind of interesting to know whether it's happily occupied. I mean, this gets to sort of to Gretchen's point, you know, I mean, is it a community or is it just a holding pen in the city of New York?
That's a good question too, Wint. Maybe Aaron could answer that, because in fact, this is going to be rehabbed using the tax credits. And unlike a lot of other tax credits, it's not going to turn into luxury housing. It's actually going to improve the apartments for the people who live there. And ever since HUD has been now allowing buildings like this to take the tax credits, we've been getting more regular buildings that are going to be rehabbed for the people who live there. So maybe Aaron, could you talk about the project and what they're going to do to upgrade the apartments?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the tenants that live in the building are happy, of course, that there are going to be improvements made. So the character defining features, the corridors and the lobby spaces, the volumes will all be retained and the glazed tile will be retained. But the finishes within the apartment units and any modern finishes, like some of the tile on the corridors or the tile that you're seeing here on the floor in the lobby, will all be upgraded. So currently it's kind of scattered throughout the building what units have been upgraded over time as people moved in and out. So now everything will be brought to modern finishes that are in keeping with, the original design of the building, but upgraded.
And what about in the apartments themselves?
Yeah, so within the apartments is actually where the largest finish updates will be, because there's not really a lot of historic fabric intact within the layouts are all there, but the original finishes aren't there, and they're not, the greatest finishes. So they'll all be updated to meet more modern finishes with tile floors in the bathroom, all new appliances, all new, utilities. All of that's going to be updated for the tenants.
What's your sense of the people living there and how they?
So NYCHA, as well as the developers that are partnering with NYCHA, have actually been presenting all of the proposed designs to the community that lives in the building as they go through the process to make sure that they're getting feedback and that they're moving forward in a way that the tenants are actually going to like. So they've been really participating throughout the whole design process. And as you can see, as people have commented, the interior needs some work. So they're all very positive about the changes that are going to be happening. And to comment on the positive perspective of the nomination, we weren't necessarily trying to say that it was a positive outcome for everyone that lived there, but NYCHA at this time was trying to move away from completely knocking out entire blocks of historic buildings to put in super block developments. And this was kind of one of their first iterations of an idea to have less demolition of historic structures, to displace less residents in the areas. So that's kind of that's the positive spin we were putting on it, because that's what they were really trying to do, rather than focusing on after it was constructed, what happened with the tenants that lived in the building.
Right. I don't know if that answers everybody's question. Carol, do you have anything to say? You're an expert on public housing. You're not knowledgeable about the subject.
I think she's muted.
Carol Clark. Okay.
I don't see her on the list now. Maybe she's
I see her. I see her on the list, but she was muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. With all due respect to my colleagues Gretchen and Wint, as a New Yorker, I have a different perspective on this matter. I think it's very exciting to see this series of NYCHA properties being considered. I think there's been careful selection, as the consultant from Philadelphia was noting, as to which ones have been put forward and which ones are going to be put forward. And as the nomination says, New York has a very proud history in the development of public housing in the United States, and the Audubon houses appears to me to be clearly worthy of listing. The time has come, and I think the consultant, what she just put on the record, is all very relevant and should be noted. It certainly might seem surprising to us, but I think it's a remarkably welcome surprise, and I'm fully in support of these nominations. This one being the first of a series. Thank you.
Great. Any further discussion? That was wonderful. Do I hear a motion to approve this nomination?
Move, Carol Clark.
Do I hear a second? I will second the motion. All right. Is anyone opposed or abstaining from the vote for this nomination? All right.
No. This is Gretchen Soren. I'm opposed and without amendments. I think it should be amended. So I vote no.
Okay. So then we will not stop discussing this. Is there amendments to the nomination form that you can suggest, and can those be considered at this time?
Well, I suggest that the social history be.
I think she did. Aaron, is that something that you feel you could add?
Yeah, I would certainly be happy to add a social history component that deals with what happened after the building was constructed for the tenants that lived there. It may be challenging to speak specifically about the tenants in this building. We've had some challenges on that research, but we could put it in a larger context of public housing in that era, in that location, and maybe specifically West Pocket public housing for the tenants, if that would be in line with kind of what we're discussing.
And Gretchen, would that change your opinion of the voting process here?
Yes, if it's amended, I would be happy with the nomination, or I would vote yes for the nomination. I wouldn't be happy with it, but I'd vote yes.
Okay.
Understood, and well said.
Well, Gretchen, we could make sure that we would run that extra text by you.
All right, so I'm going to consider this to be unanimous consent with the stipulation that the nomination be modified and reviewed by Gretchen. Is that acceptable? Thank you, everyone. Good discussion.
Thank you, members.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Linda, moving on to Mary Mcleod Bethune houses.
Okay, next, moving up a little up the street, and similar, similar NYCHA, public housing. Mary Mcleod, Bethune Gardens is a senior public housing tower designed by architects Simon Raines and Ralph Pomerantz for the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA. Located on the southern border of Manhattan's Washington Heights neighborhood, Bethune had served in its original capacity since opening in March 1967. It is locally significant under criterion A in the area of politics and government as an early representative example of a federally funded senior high-rise in New York City. Before 1956, affordable housing dedicated to senior citizens was virtually non-existent. As the elderly population increased and societal changes resulted in the elderly living alone in homes that they could not afford on fixed incomes, state and federal legislation expanded the public housing program to qualify elderly citizens. The Housing Act of 1956 expanded federal affordable housing programs to accommodate seniors and as such funded the construction of purpose-built senior housing. Subsequent housing acts in 1961 and 1965 further expanded this aspect of the program, providing significant federal funding. At that time, NYCHA focused its efforts on expanding the total number of its units in the city while making an effort to provide alternatives to superblock developments and the inevitable large-scale demolition and displacement that followed. Federal funding for senior housing, therefore, opened the door for NYCHA to increase its total unit count and meet the demand for affordable housing for senior citizens. Next slide. NYCHA's original design for elderly housing often paired them with existing superblock developments. As such, they were situated within a larger landscape site that more often than not was located away from urban centers and required demolition of a lot of the neighborhood historic core. By the time Bethune was built, NYCHA had developed their vest pocket housing that served more as infill of underutilized or vacant lots. This was the ideal development model for elderly housing. As a single building on a single site, Bethune Gardens required minimal demolition to construct, with nearly half the lot already vacant at the time of construction. Next slide. In addition to being an example of NYCHA's early vest pocket housing concept, Bethune is also an excellent example of senior housing. The overall design of the building and site follows the federal design standards from the 1960s. The building is located on a main thoroughfare and is close to commercial activity and public transportation. It was designed to include a park at its rear to provide an area for residents to enjoy the outdoors. The building itself also conforms to the standards. It was designed with minimal decoration and economical and durable materials. As a high-rise tower, elevators serve as the primary means of movement from floor to floor, requiring minimal stairs for the residents. On the first floor, the building contains various recreation and multi-purpose rooms and kitchen space. Next slide. Bethune was among the first federally funded senior housing developments in New York City. Additionally, as an example of early vest pocket or scattered site development, the building was also among the city's first senior housing high-rise, not associated with an existing superblock development. The period of significance for this building is 1965 to 1967, inclusive of the period of construction. We have a Part 1 approval from the National Park Service. We also have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. And again, Aaron with Heritage Consulting Group was the preparer of the nomination. I'm not sure if if there's any continued discussion or if Aaron wanted to add a few comments on this nomination.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I am here again to answer any specific questions that you have about this development. It's similar in Audubon that it's also this pocket, but what's really interesting in addition to that about the building is that prior to its construction, there really were not a lot of senior housing developments that were just for seniors. They were grouped onto those larger super block developments that again would lead to the demolition of, you know, a lot of historic buildings. And so this was again kind of combining the vest pocket development idea with a building that would just be for senior housing and have some aspects of the building that would lend itself better to seniors, like having the outdoor space at the rear.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions and comments from the board? Does the prior discussion carry over into this building set as well?
This is Gretchen again. I have to say that I was very disappointed to read all of the applications and find out that only 2 applications that were sites related to African Americans were projects.
Mm-hmm.
This is Wynn. I have a question. Are these essentially single occupancy apartments, or is there an ability for a senior citizen to have a younger person helping them? What are the arrangements in the individual units?
I can speak to that. So actually a lot of it requires that a senior lives in the unit, but some of them have other family members living in the units as well with them. And it does have different varying sizes of units to accommodate for that. So, and that's how it was traditionally set up from the beginning. It has a community center. Part of the idea of some of these initial senior housing developments was to embrace the community and have it so that the seniors were not isolated as they had been in some of the previous developments. So they'd have community centers or even daycare centers within the buildings. So that was kind of the idea here as well.
Thank you. I'd be happy to move the approval of this one.
I have a comment, if I could step in and make it, please. Cy Brynas was a member of the board, as the nomination notes on page 20 of the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and that's where I worked with him for a 5-year period, my first professional role. And I had no idea until I read this nomination that Pomerantz and Brynas, their firm, designed over 400 buildings, and I was delighted to see that the nomination actually quoted the New York, who died at age 97 in 2003, saying that what architecture and planning need in the future is a more deliberate pace and a more human scale. And he said, I have learned that large-scale instant projects leave little room for adjustment for errors or experience. One can only wonder what more Cy might have said if he were here to talk to us. He was very, very erudite.
Indeed. Other points of discussion or questions or comments? I believe we had a motion from Wint. Do I have that right?
Second it. Yeah, Wint made a motion.
Yeah. Carol Clark seconds. Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask what happened to Hunts Point Rail Station? A fascinating nomination. It's been withdrawn for some reason.
Hi, Wynn. This is Linda. So that one, it's going to be presented at the March meeting. There was, as far as ownership, because you have the station itself and the bridge, there was a little confusion with as far as the ownership and notification. So we wanted to move that to the March meeting to allow for proper notification in meeting those specific requirements. So it will be at the March meeting.
Thank you.
All right, moving forward to Kath LaFranc and the Lillian Wald residents.
Okay, good morning, everyone, or I guess it's good afternoon. So the 3 buildings that you see form the Henry Street settlement. And along with the neighborhood playhouse, which is several blocks away, these 4 were listed on the National Register and designated a National Historic Landmark in 1974 for their significance in social history. The nomination that we're bringing before you today, prepared under our NPS Underrepresented Communities Grant for LGBT properties in New York City, includes only the two on the right, 265 and 267 Henry Street. And those two buildings are significant under Criterion B in the areas of health, social history women, and social history LGBT for their association with the life and work of nationally significant public health nurse and progressive reformer Lillian Wald, who founded the Henry Street settlement in 1893 and lived and worked in those two buildings for the majority of her productive life, from 1895 until her retirement in 1933. The third building on the far left was not acquired until after Wald retired, and thus it has no association with her life and is not included in this nomination. Next slide. Here are two pictures of Wald as a very young nurse and as a mature woman. Lillian Wald was born in Cincinnati in 1867, and she grew up in Rochester. It's really hard to describe her achievements in a short summary. She was a true visionary. She founded the field of public health nursing, started the school lunch program in New York, established the first classrooms for children with special needs, placed the first nurse in a public school, worked for women's suffrage, for unions, for the rights of immigrants, and against child labor. She was a founder of the NAACP. She was influential in almost all aspects of progressive era reform, fighting for both practical and structural changes. Now, people support reforms for all sorts of reasons, but I think what struck me the most was that her advocacy was based on treating each person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. She believed that poverty and sickness resulted from environmental factors rather than moral failings. And this was really very radical in her own time when eugenics and disdain for immigrants were widely held views. She was also extremely successful in publicizing her views and in influencing wealthy and powerful people. And she brought these people like Jane Addams, Frances Perkins, Amelia Earhart, Al Smith, W.E.B. Du Bois, Eleanor Roosevelt, and people from all walks of life to Henry Street to discuss issues of social welfare and civil rights. Thus, she was also able to leverage her influence to influence the causes she believed in, because many of these people then became agents of change. So next slide. This is an historic view of 265 and 267. Both of these buildings were constructed as single-family residences in the 1830s. They were purchased by Jacob Schiff, one of Wald's wealthy friends, and donated to the settlement house. 265 on the left in 1895 and 267 on the right in 1906. The building at 265 was raised a half story when it was donated, and 267 actually received a new colonial revival facade along with an extra story and a basement entrance, which was a popular feature at the time. The two buildings were also internally connected on each floor around 1906, but in such a way that each retained its individual definition and character. Next slide, please. And here they are today. Very little has changed in over a century. And next slide. These are the entrances. 265 is very intact to the 1830s, even retains original ironwork. And the early 20th century ground floor entrance on 267 serves as the main entrance to the settlement house today. Next slide. On the interior, somewhat amazingly, because they remain in use as a settlement house, both buildings retain a very high level of integrity to the 1830s. This is the hall and parlors of 265, and on the left, we're looking back towards the original stair, which has a very beautiful carved newel post. Each house is 2 rooms deep, and behind the stair, where you see the window, you're looking at an enclosed passage that was built in the 20th century to connect all 3 buildings. Next slide. Okay, this is the second floor rear room of 265, and this is Wald's bedroom and study. In addition to serving that function with access to a private sleeping porch, Wald also used it for meetings, and she received visitors there during the day. Next. These are the two first floor rooms of 267. So despite the colonial revival exterior, they also retain 1830s detail. And this was the dining room meeting space in Wald's day, and it was very important to the function of the house. Here, Wald would organize the work of the settlement, and she served as head of the family, the term she and the other residents used because that was the way they perceived themselves. Wald and the nurses gathered here for meals, to discuss cases, refresh themselves, and socialize, as well as reconnect with other family members. Next slide. However, it also functioned for settlement house needs, and there are numerous photos of this space showing different classes being held. Next. And these are current and historic photos of the rear elevation, and you can see Wald's sleeping porch, and there have been a few changes to the rear. The porch was enlarged and a passage created on the lower floors to connect the buildings. And now next. These are two views of the garden. Wald was the one who created the playground, and the historic photo on the right is by Jacob Rees. And then next. Okay, this is Wald with Jane Addams, another well-known leader of the settlement house movement. Now, perhaps more important than documenting Wald's contributions to public health, this nomination recognizes her significance under social history women and social history LGBT. Wald was among the first generation of so-called new women, educated middle-class women who chose to live and work in environments with other women like themselves that allowed them to create influential political and social networks in order to leverage social changes. These women chose the paths that were open to them in their day, and many were enormously successful in their fields. Some were social workers, some were teachers, some were nuns, active in education, medicine, or hospital administration. Some were in business or labor, and many were artists. And while many of them were lesbians, not all of them were, and most were not public about their sexuality. Jane Addams was in a long-term relationship with a woman. Lillian Wald had several short-term romantic relationships, but many platonic ones. But this was much more about female empowerment, and it was about communities of women, many of whom lived together and lived communally, doing meaningful work in society and establishing alternatives to the nuclear family and to traditional gender roles that allowed them to fulfill their promise. Okay, next. This is a picture of the Henry Street family in one period. And as Wald established other settlement houses, she also set them up communally as families. At Henry Street, most of the spaces were shared spaces. Wald's bedroom, for example, available to her for private activity, was also a meeting room. The dining room was a family room, but it was also a classroom. Many spaces served both private needs and group needs. And because these buildings are so intact today, we can understand how Wald used them, how she lived and worked, and how important these spaces were to her identity. And finally, the last slide. And this is Wald's picture in the National Gallery of Art, painted by William Valentine Sheville in 1919. And I just want to mention that Wald, who died in 1940, is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester, where she and several others were considered persons of transcendent importance when we listed that property. So questions about Lillian Wald or her home, and I have a letter of support from LPC. And let's see, I don't think, is Amanda Davis on here? She was going to try, and I'm not sure. Do we have anybody from Henry Street?
Yes, we do.
We do, okay. And I just want to say that this was prepared by Andrew Dolkart and Katie Vogel, who I think did a spectacular job on the significance statement. Who do we have?
We have Barbara Cancelbaum, the VP of Communications and Marketing.
Okay, would you like to say something, Barbara?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to speak?
Sure. I'd be delighted to say a few words. Just on behalf of Henry Street Settlement, I just want to thank the New York State Review Board for so thoughtfully considering our nomination. Our team has long felt that it was important to acknowledge our site's LGBTQ history. And we reached out to LGBT historic sites several years ago with an interest in reinterpreting our National Register listing. And we're just, so thrilled to be here today. So we're very careful not to ascribe words or feelings to our trailblazing founder, Lillian Wald, who lived in the 1800s and early 1900s, but we can't help but think she would be thrilled with this designation.
Well said. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
It's Carol Clark here. I think that I have to agree with Kath that it's a phenomenally well done update to the, nomination. And I think if Andrew Dolkart, who's my colleague at Columbia University and was a classmate of mine there as well, if he were here, he might also add the sentence that documentation of LGBT couples living together in New York City before the 1920s is rare, thus making Henry Street settlement significant as an early example of such a residence.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
agree with that, Carol. And I have to say, I wasn't that excited about this when Andrew first tried to twist my arm, because I said, well, she's already documented because it's an NHL. But then as I learned about her, when I read the draft, I was really bowled over. And I commend, I wish Katie were on here to hear my commendment. But they did a spectacular job on this, and I'm very excited about it.
And as the representative from Henry Street maybe didn't make as clear as we could make the influence of the Henry Street settlement, its sort of groundbreaking work continues and continued, and it's documented in the nomination. It's really one of the more significant settlement houses in the city.
Yep. Agreed. And this is just an aside, but at the recent statewide preservation conference, I was on a panel with the director of the Alice Austin House, and she made a point of saying how much it meant to the site and how much it increased their ability to tell the story that they had the extra LGBT designation. She spoke so well. I wish I had written down what she said, but anyway, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments or a motion to approve?
I'll move the approval. It's Carol Clark.
And I'd second it. This is Wind. A great institution and a great nomination.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Kath.
Thank you all so much.
Moving to Aaron Zernecki and the Smith Voorhees Covenhoven House.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. This is the Smith Voorhees Covenhoven House. It's a 23-acre property located in Fultonville, Town of Glen, Montgomery County, and is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture. Next slide. The house is framed in the New World Dutch manner with a series of closely spaced H vents, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner, an example of the framing technique. This framing system is typically employed for story-and-a-half constructs in Dutch and German settled areas, but in this instance, modified to accommodate a full second story. The building portrays the adaptation of existing building traditions and techniques in the face of architectural and cultural change. The period of significance, circa 1786 to circa 1830, encompasses all of the architectural significant changes made to the residence early in its history. Next slide, please. Built in circa 1786 by Jeremiah Smith, the house is a center hall type that became increasingly common in the Mohawk Valley after the Revolution, being a type strongly associated with New England building traditions. Smith came to the Mohawk Valley from Claverick to establish a mercantile center trading in timber products. He purchased 282 acres in the eastern allotment of the Delancey patent from the heirs of the original patentee and built this residence on the plateau above the valley. The large size of the house suggests Jeremiah might have centered his business ventures here, perhaps only using a few rooms as living space for the family. Next slide. Many of the interior features date to the occupancy of Peter Voorhees, who appears to have finished or redecorated the center hall and western room in the Federal style early in his ownership from 1796 to 1815. In 1826, Seth Covenhoven bought the house, added a 1.5-story kitchen Elle, and reoriented the house to a new highway that opened after 1828. Subsequent owners established a pattern of preservation for this residence, sustaining many of the original features and allowing for the understanding of how different construction and stylistic traditions intersected in the post-revolutionary period in rural Montgomery County. This nomination was researched and written by consultant Jesse Ravage, and the current homeowner is using the homeowner tax credit program for further rehabilitation to the residents. The nomination has received a letter of support also from the Town of Glen historian. And this is the Smith Voorhees Covenhoven House. Are there any questions?
I have a question. How many contributing properties are represented? 2 or 3?
There is one other contributing building, a smokehouse. And then there's quite a few non-contributing buildings that were built past the period of significance.
The form says that there are 3 contributing and 10 non-contributing, but is it just 2 that are contributing?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is a mistake on the form because there was a change to that. There was only 2 contributing buildings.
Okay, double check that.
I will make that change.
Final. Yes. I appreciate the hand-drawn map that's presented in this nomination. It really gives you an insight into the process of the form preparer and how they thought about the lay of the land and the parcels in and around this house, and really did a good job studying that. So that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Any guest speakers?
I do know that the homeowner is on along with the consultant. I'm not sure if either one of them wants to say anything.
Yeah, they're certainly welcome.
Mm-hmm. The consultant, I will say the consultant did a very good job on the background research of the people that lived in this house. And there were a few things that we had to cut down, but she did a phenomenal job on the research.
I quite agree.
During the pandemic too, which was difficult.
Indeed.
Okay.
All right, well, we don't want to put anybody on the spot, so I'm looking for a motion.
This is Wayne Goodman. I'll move.
Do I hear a second?
Yeah, this is Jay. I'll second.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Well done.
Thank you.
And moving on to Ulbiston.
Yes, this is the Ulbiston Flats, constructed in 1898. They represent a significant contribution to Utica's social and architectural history, as conveyed in the apartment-style living in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Organized on a large rectangular site, the apartment complex was purpose-built with originally around 100 units to accommodate middle to upper-class multifamily housing solution in Utica's Genesee Hill neighborhood at a time of population growth. In anticipation of the need for more prestigious housing for the upper and middle classes in this area of the city, real estate developers Milton H. Northrup and Seymour D. Latcher hired architect Richard A. George to design the Ulbiston Flats, replacing a previous complex called Genesee Flats that was destroyed by fire on the same site in 1896. This apartment building, reminiscent of the row house typology, illustrates a distinctive architectural response to the issue of fireproofing and designing urban housing, recalling an important aspect of the turn of the 20th century residential growth and development in the city of Utica. Next slide. The Ulbiston Flats is significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its impact on the residential settlement patterns and development of Utica's Genesee Hill neighborhood, specifically apartment dwelling for the upper and middle classes in the early to mid 20th century. In this way, the construction and design of the Ulbiston apartments substantially encouraged the denser style of residential settlement for this neighborhood in a pattern that became characteristic of the early 20th century. The Oblestein Flats is also significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of an apartment building using Renaissance Revival style. The building exhibits a repetitive interior plan that reflects an interest in maximizing fireproofing and cost efficiency in its design and construction while providing large, airy, light-filled spaces to the units inside. This emphasis on fireproofing was accentuated with ornamental details on the exterior, lending a sophisticated aesthetic approach to this otherwise repetitive design. Renaissance Revival details such as the undulating bay windows, carved ornamental stone details, and sandstone columns and tablatures at each entrance would have made the repetitive facade reminiscent of the row house topology, attractive to upper and middle class tenants. The period of significance begins in 1898 when the Oblestein Flats was constructed and ends in 1960 when the broader historic context of residential settlement patterns had fully changed the Oblestein Flats to a working class tenant population due to the predominant trend of upper and middle class residents moving to the suburbs. By this time, the original 100 units had been subdivided into 150 units, and the building had been sold multiple times. Next slide. The facade is oriented towards Genesee Street to the north and is 5 stories tall with a 7-story portion rising above the flat roofline in the center of the building. It is divided into 8 rows, each row with an entrance via sandstone steps. The north and west elevations are clad in red rusticated sandstone, and red brick characterizes the secondary south and east elevations. Next slide. Each row has one main exterior entrance on the primary elevation, accessing an internal stairwell, and one secondary exit at the rear elevation, accessing a fire escape. The entrances led to a marble stair with metal baluster rails, wood handrails, and detailed wood newel posts that rise to the landing at a set of apartments on each floor. All rows are connected internally by a single shared corridor running east to west inside the building at the rear. Each row also has a north-south corridor accessing units to the east and west. The units are stacked to mirror each other on each floor. Next slide. The arrangement of the units is structurally organized with a concern for fireproofing, with a brick bearing wall dividing each row. A window well centrally located along the bearing wall towards the rear allows light into the apartment interiors. Within each row, there is one primary shared entrance on the exterior to the north, each accessing originally 4 units per floor. The organization of the apartments is typically with a family room, parlor located at the bay window, bedrooms located adjacent to window wells for light and ventilation, and kitchens located to the rear adjacent to the back common hallway entrance. The major alteration to this plan includes some new partition walls to accommodate smaller apartments. Next slide. Many of the units retain their original material fabric, including wood sash windows, aprons, stools, casing, hardwood floors, and plaster walls, amidst internal later drywall subdividing walls. Whereas originally many units would have occupied the depth of the building from north to south, it is common in the building today to see 2 units stacked, with a total of 4 in each row. The original unit plan for the family apartments is still intact in a few locations to convey a historic understanding of the original layout. This complex is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1 and is being developed for affordable apartments. This is the Oblestein Flats. Are there any questions?
Questions or comments from the board? Any representatives of the project as guests?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, I'm happy to hear a motion to approve.
This is Jay. I'll make a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second. This is Kristen.
Kristen, second. Kristen Herron, second. Any opposed or abstained? It carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Erin. All right, we're moving on to page 2 and James Finelli and into Schenectady.
Yeah, I have two here for the city of Schenectady. First one here is Schenectady Savings Bank. Schenectady Savings Bank is significant under Criterion A in the area of commerce for its long association with one of the city's most important financial institutions and for its association with nationwide changes in the banking industry. Beginning after the Depression and culminating after World War II, banks sought to restore confidence in the banking industry and redefine themselves as part of the retail sector. These themes are manifest in changes to the bank's facade and especially in its interior plan, materials, and finishes. Next slide, please. The Schenectady Savings Bank is composed of sections constructed in separate building campaigns. The original building was constructed in 1905. There's a 1927 abutting 3-story addition to the east, which is to your left here in the photo. And a 1973 wing made possible by incorporating the interior of the 1927 addition. So again, to the left in the photo. A rear addition was built in 1978 after the period of significance and is considered non-historic. In 1952, the bank engaged the services of Hodgson Brothers, a premier design build firm, which grafted a sleek modern storefront over most of the facade. Next slide, please. On the interior, a glass-enclosed heated vestibule welcomes customers. The floor is a large open space with widely spaced desks. A drop ceiling with fluorescent lights overhead provides additional light. Next slide, please. And that shows the vestibule to the left there. The vault to the right is I believe the 1920s vault, but then they opened up the space so that you could see the vault. Next slide, please. Schenectady Savings Bank was established in 1834 and is one of the city's oldest and most successful banks. In 1905, the bank built the current building on a prominent downtown site. Constructed in a balanced neoclassical style, the building had stone coins, a center entrance within a pedimented surround, tall, round arched windows, a classical cornice, and a stone balustrade. In form and style, the bank was typical of its period. Next slide, please. In 1927, the bank expanded by acquiring a building to the east and remodeling it in a complementary style. The addition continued the classical cornice and balustrade, repeated the coins, and a 2-story tall tripartite window surmounted by a large stone lintel on the facade. Interior changes included the addition of a mezzanine in the new section. So you can see in the right photo, they extended the bank lobby and they installed this mezzanine. Next slide, please. Like most American banks, Schenectady Savings was eager to improve its public image in the years following the Depression and especially after World War II. This was part of a national trend in which bankers began to realize that they needed a new and more accessible image. More courteous and efficient customer service, more enticing designs, and especially more welcoming and comfortable interiors. In 1952, the interior was designed, as I noted before, by the Hodgson brothers, and it fully embraced the open and inviting plan that was intended to secure the commercial goals of modern bank design. Ads bragged about air conditioning and music playing in the background while you were doing your banking. The interior represents all the features recommended by architects and planners to present the bank as part of the post-war retail economy. Schenectady Savings Bank was the first bank in the city to undertake a modernization. In the process, establishing a modern vocabulary, other competing local banks were soon to follow. So the earlier photos I showed, and we could back up a few slides to show those. those earlier photos showing its current state, it basically looks like the way it did from 1957 on that interior. I think if you go back two more slides, it'll show the interiors. Yeah, so they really when they do this renovation, the emphasis really is on the interior, getting people in the door, but once they're in the door, really almost giving them that department store feel. And go back one more slide just to show the 1952 lobby. And so there's the photo up in the left that shows what it looked like. They had taken the mezzanine out. They put in the drop ceiling so they could install air conditioning. So they really wanted to make this a comfortable retail experience. The Schenectady Savings Bank hasn't approved Part 1, so this was a PDIL. And that's all I have to say. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Questions or comments from the board? Schenectady Savings Bank.
No, this is Jay. I just wanted to say I've driven by this bank so many times and always kind of wondered what had happened to it over the years. So it was interesting to read. It was interesting to read the nomination and see the different phases that it went through to get to where it is today. Because if you look at it, you can really see it's such a strange mix of styles. So it was interesting to read the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to move it.
All right.
I'd also like to just quickly note that this is being listed only under criterion A for commerce, not for its architecture.
And Jay, this is Kath, and I just wanted to note that that's why it's not significant under C, because it's a strange mix. They tried, but we didn't feel they quite got it.
All right, so Jay's comments came with a motion. Do I hear a second or any other comments or questions?
It's Carol. I'll second it.
Thank you, Carol. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, the motion passes by unanimous consent. Thank you. And moving to the public market.
So I'd like to say on a personal note, I grew up in Schenectady. I must have driven or parked near this in the market or by this building 100 times, and I think I never even noticed it. And I personally found this is one of the more exciting nominations that I've gotten an opportunity to work on. This is the Schenectady Public Market and Scale House. The public market and scale house is significant under criterion A in the areas of commerce and government for its role in the development of government regulated public commerce. The scale house is additionally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a unique and rare surviving example of an early 20th century market building type. This is, I cannot emphasize enough based on the research we've done, how rare and unique this building is. Next slide, please. The Schenectady Public Market, used currently as a parking lot, it's owned by Metroplex, the local development agency, and it occupies a roughly 2-acre city block in the city's commercial district. If you know Schenectady, it's like practically right next to Villa Italia and right down from Bowtie Cinema. So if you go to the movies, you might end up parking in that parking lot. The scale house is located at the southwest corner of the former market and is constructed in the Dutch colonial revival style with brick and ceramic tile walls covered in stucco and a red tile roof. Next slide, please. The building's primary defining features are its roof and archway. The roof has decorative scrolled Flemish cross gables on both the east and west elevations and parapeted north and south gable ends with the suggestion of center chimneys. The archway bisects the building through its center and divides the interior into 2 symmetrical blocks. Next slide, please. And here's just a couple of views of the interior. The interior is very plain, but you can see that it really hasn't there hasn't been like major rehabs or changes to the interior fabric in its history. The Schenectady Public Market, next slide, please. The Schenectady Public Market was established in 1915 near downtown Schenectady to serve the city's growing industries and commercial spaces in the early 20th century. And the photo at the front, from what I read, it appears that it was taken shortly before the establishment of the market or shortly after they were grading it. So right about that time. Growing traffic congestion and increasing concern among city officials about consumer safety led the city to establish the public market as a centralized location where both regional farm produce and locally butchered meat could be weighed and inspected before public purchase. And I should note, Schenectady, for a community of its size, was very unusual that it did not have a really designated public market space, even though it had rules on public markets. It had city officials that oversaw public markets going back to the early 19th century, if not before. They didn't really have a quote unquote market like a lot of cities did. So they were kind of a latecomer to this process. Next slide, please. The scale house was constructed at the same time as the market. Scale houses and weigh houses were once a ubiquitous function of public markets dating back to the colonial period. But by the early 20th century, expansive and commanding public market buildings had largely replaced outdoor markets or stalls as places for commerce. Scale houses appear to have been incorporated into these buildings as dedicated offices or spaces for weighing goods. As a funny side note, there is actually a 19th century public market building in the United Kingdom that literally has an office that says weigh house, even though it's physically in the building and it's not a separate house. The Schenectady Public Market did not have a market building and instead used outdoor stalls. Consequently, the scale house took on a greater role within the market, serving as a form of gatehouse, offices for variously the scale keeper, the city sealer, and if anyone doesn't know who the city sealer is, they're the person that certifies that that scales being used by a vendor or a retailer are accurate, that they're not cheating you, and a meat inspector that also was used as a weigh station. A large central arch permitted the passage of trucks and wagons, which were weighed on a set of scales that were likely embedded in the ground. So they would weigh it with the goods on it and the goods without the goods on it, so that they could calculate for the weight of the truck or the wagon. Next slide, please. Over time, the uses of the scale house evolved with the public market. You'll note that there is a different building in the right-hand corner here. Both of these photos are from the late 1930s. So you have the scale house in the lower left. The upper right, you had what was the comfort station. So in 1939, it was decided that the comfort station no longer really did what it needed to do. They also really wanted the space it was occupying on the site to lay out more stalls that could be rented to vendors. So they demolished that and they converted the weigh house or scale house to a comfort station, replacing the earlier comfort station at the public market. The Schenectady Public Market continued until about 1970. Next slide, please. And here's it in its later stages, closer to the 1970 mark. Even as supermarkets had replaced open air markets, the public market in Schenectady continued on to about 1970, at least in later years, as a wholesale market, until it finally went full-time into a parking lot, though it appears it was used as a parking lot on non-market days for much of its history. The scale house itself was mothballed at that point, about 1970, and it has remained mothballed for the past 50 years. So it does really represent very strongly the period of significance here, which is 1915 to circa 1970. This nomination was started as a Cooperstown graduate program student project, and it was completed with substantial assistance by staff in our office and Cynthia Secord at the Effner History Center in Schenectady. And I believe Cindy Falk, who is the professor who taught the class at Cooperstown, and possibly one of the students are here if they would like to say anything.
Hi, this is Cindy Falk. I'd just like, first of all, to say thank you to James for all of the extra work he did on this nomination. This began as a student project, as he pointed out, when a potential owner for the way station building contacted the Cooperstown graduate program, and it became clear through the drafts that the students created that there was really more to this project than just the way station itself. And so James has gone above and beyond in terms of tracking down great resources about the public market. And I know that one of the students, Mary Zell Gallen, is on the call as well. So thank you, Mary Zell, for getting us started with this project.
Thank you so much, James, and everyone in the SHPO office for all your assistance. I think as a new researcher, I realized how out of my depth I was working on this project, and I really appreciate all your assistance to make this happen.
All right, great. Any other questions or comments about the Schenectady Public Market and Scale House from the board?
This is Jay. It's just more of a question. It's whenever I've looked at this building, I always wondered what else was going on inside it and how if the central entrance was interconnected to the rooms at all. And I just didn't know if maybe a little sketch of a first and second floor plan would help to explain it, because we don't have very many pictures from inside. We basically focus on the outside, and I was never really clear about what was going on inside the building. And I'm happy to move it if we get there.
Yeah, I mean the floor plan is very simple. The section 7 does describe it, but we can look at maybe doing some sort of a sketch map to further illustrate it. But basically, it functions almost as two separate buildings, because you have one floor on one side, and then a second or one room on one side, then a second room on the second floor, and then the same thing. It's mirrored. There's no interconnection between the two sides. The the archway is almost just a roof that almost like a breezeway in a way. So you actually, to go from one side of the building to the other, you actually have to go outside and then go in the other side and then go up the steps.
And are the two halves fully open from floor to ceiling?
It is they're 2 stories. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're 2 stories. Each side is 2 stories. You will I don't know if you could see in one of the earlier photos. One of the earlier photos shows a couple of interior images, and I will note this building is not, the interior is not easily accessible right now. But I will say you can see in this second floor photo on the upper right, you can actually see the underside of the roof tile. So it's it is an extremely utilitarian building, and it was actually we didn't include this in the nomination because we're really focusing on the market itself, and this is a building typology. But it's very kind of funny to read reports by different city officials to the city, basically complaining how much they hate this building, how uncomfortable it is to have as an office. At one point, one guy complains we don't even have phones, and I have to request them to actually have a phone line run. And so when the current city hall was constructed, that seemed to be the excuse to get people out of that building. Kind of, times changed between the 1915 and the 1930s, really.
Is there a proposed adaptive reuse for the structure?
There has been several. One of the sticking points is the fact that the arch is a character defining feature, if not the character defining feature. And that has meant that proposals for rehabilitation inevitably always want to infill the arch, and that's been a no-go for the National Park Service. Metroplex is very supportive of this building. I was on a call with them several months ago about what their future plans were, and they emphasized that the public market, which is the parking lot, is actually a revenue earner for them, and so they have no intention of doing anything with the parking lot itself other than continuing to function as a parking lot. And that they just would like to get this building back into service in some form if some business would be willing to use it.
All right, great.
James, this is Wint. Was this building designed by just by a city architect, or was it put out on bid? How did it originate in terms of design?
I wish I knew the answer to that. That was something, we spent between Cindy and her students, myself, and Cindy Secord, who's the volunteer archivist at the Effner Center in City Hall. We spent many, many hours on this doing research and trying to find as much as we could. And unfortunately, there is an inventory at City Hall that says there are plans, but last time they did a check to the inventory about 10 years ago, the plans were missing. And as Cindy said to me, they might have just fallen behind a shelf somewhere, and I will find them someday, but we don't know. And the newspaper articles about it don't mention it. The city council meeting minutes don't mention it. They give us costs. They tell us how much it cost and the time it took to build it, but we don't know who designed it, unfortunately.
Well, you've obviously searched for that information, so good job there. All right, I believe we have a motion from Jay and a request to include another figure in the form that describes the floor plan of that building. Do I hear a second?
This is Wint. Yes, I'll second it.
And is anyone opposed or abstaining from the vote? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, James.
Very much.
And now on to James Carter and Guilderland.
Yes, that's me. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So the McCownville Country Club Highlands Historic District. The McCownville Country Club Highlands Historic District is located in the town of Guilderland, Albany County, New York, on the western outskirts of the city of Albany. The historic district is a residential enclave that chronicles the suburban development of the greater Albany, New York region during the early to mid 20th century. The McCownville Country Club Highlands Historic District is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of community planning and development as an intact example of an early 20th century residential subdivision, and Criterion C in the area of architecture for its largely intact collection of domestic suburban architecture for the first half of the 20th century. The period of significance is 1912 to 1952. Next, please. Located in and largely embodying the conceptual residential core of the town of Guilderland's McCownville hamlet, the nominated district area was surveyed and subdivided in 1912. The land to the immediate north, now SUNY Albany's Uptown campus, had already been transformed by the establishment of the Albany Country Club in the 1890s, indicating that the area was transitioning away from its earlier agrarian character. The historic district boundary largely corresponds with the extent of the subdivision as it was depicted on a 1912 survey map. So if you look here, the area highlighted in red is the proposed boundary, and the area sort of in orange there in the corner is the only part of the original subdivision that is not being included. So I'll get to that in just a second. But and now I lost my place, of course. So yes, the boundary subdivision depicted in 1912. In spite of the extension of a number of corresponding streets to the north beyond the original boundary, those latter areas have been excluded from the boundary, which was drawn to reflect the original subdivision to the extent possible. During the mid to later 1910s, new housing was built following accepted patterns relative to the developing field of American suburban domestic architecture. By the 1920s, many of the houses located in what by then had been branded as the Country Club Highlands neighborhood had associated freestanding automobile garages. those being positioned in relation to secondary service roads that formed important aspects of the developments of the rectilinear circulation plan of the neighborhood. And next slide, please. Prominent among the district's building stock are distinctive examples of popular residential architectural idioms, among them expressions of the progressive arts and crafts movement and various popular revival styles. The district presents as a cohesive assemblage accounted for by its collection of characteristic pre-Second World War suburban architectural housing types and by the uniformity provided for by consistent setbacks, modest landscaping elements, building orientation, and overarching circulation systems of main roads and secondary service alleys. Next slide. During the early years of development as Country Club Highlands, Sears Roebuck and Company offered consumers a range of housing options, including bungalows and four squares, along with various revival types. Several examples of what would appear to be Sears manufactured houses are present in the McCownville Country Club Highlands Historic District. If you see the top photo there, among these is one that represents the lingering taste of the late Victorian era, as opposed to more progressive architectural idioms, that being the house at 4 Norwood Street, the massing and tower of which are of distinct Queen Anne style derivation. The house's design appears to relate directly to Sears's modern house number 167, the Maytown, as you can see next to it, offered by the company as a mail order kit in 1912 and again in the following year. Below that, more characteristic of the district's early development are examples of the bungalow house, a product of the arts and crafts movement. Many examples of this type are present in the district, an excellent example being at 4 Waverly Place, seen here, which combines frame construction with a partially stucco-clad porch. The end gabled house's massing brackets and express rafter tiles relates to Sears's Hollywood model, a 1920 offering. Next slide, please. At the top, in another example, other houses within the district also show their derivation from Sears catalog offerings. For instance, the house at 1 Parkwood Street is clearly derived from the design offered in 1926 in the Honor-Built line as the Glens Falls. It is somewhat eclectic in nature, combining a gambrel roof with an entrance contained with a projecting cross-gabled feature with steeply pitched roof. Although a formerly open porch has been since enclosed, the similarities in massing and overall treatment indicate its direct association with that particular Sears design. And lastly there, another example is the house at 9 Glenwood Street, which shares features of the house design published as the Cedars in the 1927-1932 period. Although in that instance, modifications were made to the design as published by Sears, thus illustrating the flexibility consumers had to change certain aspects of the published design in coordination with the company in order to build a house that suited specific conditions and tastes. Next slide, please. At least one house within the district, 3 Waverly Place, was built to the designs of a professional architect. That's the top left corner, the largest picture there. The plans were drawn up by Charles E. Heydrich, a Schenectady-based architect, and exhibits distinct craftsman-style characteristics. Of those contractors who had been known to have been active in constructing houses in the development during the period of significance, 2 figure prominently: Harold J. Blessing and William C. Whitbeck. Blessing was a great-grandson of the prominent Turnpike Tavern owner William McCown, for whom the local area is named, and was linked to the construction of 17 houses in the immediate area, which he built speculatively and in turn sold, mostly during the 1920s. Whitbeck, and you can see Whitbeck's houses. So 2 houses constructed by Blessing are in the bottom right corner in that center right there. And then the 2 vertically aligned, photos on the, left, talking about the left. Then the 2 vertically aligned photos on the right are, constructed by Whitbeck. Whitbeck, his family originally owned, surveyed, and subdivided the tract, and he was linked to the construction of 6 houses in the immediate area built during the 1910s. And last slide. So the McCownville Country Club Highlands Historic District remains an excellent representation of an early 20th century residential subdivision developed on Albany's outskirts. The district area was developed on formerly rural land on the periphery of the city that by the early 20th century had become desirable for residential purposes, given its proximity to downtown Albany. The associated building stock, the vast majority of which consists of single-family houses, remains collectively intact and speaks to contemporary trends in domestic design, and includes a number of houses that can be linked to mail-order housing catalogs. The Historic District retains a high level of cohesiveness as a planned residential subdivision and chronicles the increasing popularity of suburban enclaves in the Albany area in the early 20th century. The district has received a letter of support from Anne C. Wemple Person, the town of Guilderland historian, And extraneous support has been indicated by an outside resident of the neighborhood, a resident of Guilderland as well. We have received no objections to date. Special thanks to the sponsor, the McCownville Improvement Association, for all their hard work in researching and helping to prepare the nomination, and to my colleague Bill Krattinger for his preparation of the draft nomination, much of which I paraphrased or just directly stole for this presentation. So thank you, Bill. And I believe that Ellen Manning is here representing the McCownville Improvement Association. If she would like to speak, I can give her the microphone for a moment. Are you there, Ellen?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, James. Really appreciate that we're at this point. It's very exciting to us. I really want to thank both James and Bill Krattinger for all the work that they did to bring us to this point. It was really a great effort, and they were just very patient and courteous throughout the whole process. I also want to thank this board for your consideration of the nomination, which I hope you will approve, of course. And I'll just say that many people, thousands probably, drive through McCownville and our particular neighborhood every day without really taking in quite how residential it is. We are surrounded by commercial development, institutional development, and a lot of people over the years have worked really hard to keep and preserve the residential character of what we consider a really special neighborhood. And if we do get listed on the state or national registers, I think that will be definitely providing us with protection, and also, a distinction that I think will draw people's attention and appreciation for our little area that we enjoy living in very much. So thank you, and again, I really appreciate the work that's been done by SHPO and our resident volunteers very much.
And just, very quickly to follow up on what Ellen said there. And yeah, if you're unfamiliar with the area, it's like you very prominently drive past this, and it's deceptive how elaborate the residential housing is off of Western Avenue, Route 20 there, as you sort of enter Albany off of I-87 coming in southbound. So it's I've driven past this a number of times. I went to the University at Albany for undergrad. So I'm very excited to see this move forward.
Thank you, James. Questions or comments from the board? I notice on the map that lots 21 and 22 are non-contributing but included, and they're in the northwest corner. Is there any, I also noticed in the southwest corner that there are 3 lots that are not included in the district, and I just wonder if there would ever be consideration of keeping 21 and 22 out.
So I would have to run back and check real quick. 21 and 22, I believe, so the way that the hashing is indicated here, that means they were constructed in 1950 to 1959. I think they were just sort of not stylistically representative of the rest of the sort of development. The bottom corner there in the southwest, that is currently a commercial medical complex. So those what had been in there has subsequently been, it doesn't relate in any way to the existing residential character.
Yeah, a minor point. Other questions and comments? Or a motion to approve?
Well, this is Lucy. I'm happy to approve it.
All right, Lucy can move it, and I will second. Anyone opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, James Carter.
Thank you.
Moving on to Dan Boggs and the Reynolds House.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, presenting the Reynolds House. Named for the family who owned it for more than a century. The Reynolds House, located at 56 West University Street in the village of Alfred, Allegheny County, New York, is being nominated under Criterion C in the area of architecture, with a period of significance reflecting the completion of the house in circa 1864. Next slide, please. The Reynolds House is a distinguished example of picturesque architecture exhibiting an eclectic blending of architectural elements characteristic of Second Empire and Italianate style, with Eastlake and Gothic influences indicated in the cusped arch and hanging pendant barging in the gable ends. Design characteristics include asymmetric cross-gabled plan and massing, pedimented windows, wide eaves with decorative brackets, a mansarded tower, and a two-story bay window. Next slide, please. Looking here at the east elevation, the Reynolds House is a 2 1/2 story clapboard-sided residence resting on a stone foundation with a basement. The house is of wood frame construction with intersecting gable and hip roofs and low-pitch hip and flat roofs. Next slide, please. The main entry to the house is through double doors at the base of the tower. A curved stair with an ornate rail, turned balusters, and a large octagonal newel rises through the tower to provide the main access to the upper floors. Next slide, please. The hall opens to a parlor to the west and a dining room to the north. The parlor to the west is generously lit by the south-facing bay window. Next slide. The Reynolds House enjoys a remarkable degree of historic integrity throughout, having retained much of the original layout, original varnished woodwork, flooring, decorative window moldings, doors, trim, and other features. Next slide. The historic integrity of the house can be seen to be equally well maintained in these photos of the second floor. The second floor has 4 bedrooms, an office, 2 bathrooms, and a small laundry room. Next slide. Within the tower of the Reynolds House, we are fortunate to have a small bit of graffiti from one of its original workmen. Illustrated in the photo on the right, we can read Frank Fisk, 1862. Next slide. The Reynolds House has long drawn the attention and admiration of the community due to its striking architecture and, for much of its history, the exterior coloration. The house is commonly known among locals as the Christmas House due to its historic red and green exterior paint scheme that has been replicated and maintained by the present owner based on physical and documentary evidence. This nomination has received a letter of support from the Alfred Village historian. And the owner of the house, Tim Nichols, who did much of the research and writing for this nomination, is with us today. Tim, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. I am really, it's a pleasure and honor for me to be here with you. And I don't have much to add, and I have enjoyed and appreciated so much all of Daniel's work on this and getting to know him. And I also am fascinated by this whole meeting and by the great work that you folks do. I'm a lifelong lover of history and the past, and I feel so honored to be associated with this historic home. I don't even really see myself so much as the owner as just the current caretaker of it that's, accepting a treasure from the past and trying my best to preserve it for those who'll come after me. When I bought this house, it had been a rental for 7 years. And one of the reasons that I wanted to pursue historic registry for it is because of a kind of a troubling trend in the village of Alfred that many of the historic homes end up being bought up by outside investors or absentee landlords for the lucrative student rental market. The village of Alfred has about 1,000 residents, but every year we have about 5,000 students join us at the 2 institutions in town. I'm a professor at one of them. I love our students, but they tend to be hard on some of these older, beautiful homes. And so in my early days of sitting out on the porch, so many villagers would stop by and express their appreciation that I had purchased it and retained it as a single family dwelling and am not converting it to student housing. I joined them in being kind of saddened by the condition of a number of the older historic homes in our little town. I remember just one last thing. My first week in the house, I had hired an electrician to come up and do some work for me, and I heard him answer his phone while he was there, and he said, "No, I've left there. I'm at the Christmas house now." And I was struck by and I found it charming that the villagers know and love and feel connected to the house and nickname it the Christmas house. So I want to do my part to maintain and preserve this lovely old home for the generations to come. And I just want to thank you for your time and consideration. And it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Nicely said. Other questions or comments about the Christmas house? Or a motion to approve?
Hi, this is Wayne. I would make that motion.
This is Kristen. I'll second.
Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Dan. Moving to North Main and West Water Streets.
All right. The North Main and West Water Streets Historic District was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2015. Located on the north side of the Chemung River in the city of Elmira, Chemung County, New York, the district included a small portion of West Water Street and a longer section of North Main Street. The original district encompassed 12 contributing commercial buildings, shown in green, dating from the mid-19th through the mid-20th century, representing Elmira's period of economic prosperity. The North Main and West Water Streets Historic District boundary increase includes two new sections, one to the east and the other to the north of the current district. The eastern portion adds 3 historic buildings on West Water Street, drawing the district boundary there to a more logical termination. And the northern portion brings in Wisner Park and a commercial building and 3 historic churches that surround the park, all visually and historically connected to the neighborhood. The expansion is eligible under Criterion C in the area of architecture and Criterion A in the area of social history. The North Main and West Water Street Historic District boundary increase is the result of additional study and tells a fuller story of this downtown neighborhood's development beyond its important commercial history. Next slide. These 2 slides are from the intersection of North Main Street and West Water Streets. On the top, looking west down Water Street, the historic commercial buildings extend the visual length of the proposed boundary increase. And on the bottom, looking north up North Main, the eye is naturally drawn toward the green expanse of Wisner Park and the tall spire of Trinity Church, now the terminus of the expanded district. Next slide. This is West Water Street looking east from the end of the district expansion back toward North Main. Included are the new contributing buildings added to the district: 251, 257 West Water Street and 261 West Water Street on screen right, and 248, 252 West Water Street on screen left. Next slide. Now turning our attention to the northern section of the boundary increase, we are looking at the 2 halves of Wisner Park, as bisected by North Main. Next slide. You can see the 2 halves of Wisner Park on this map. And this photo is taken on West Church Street and shows Park Congregational Church in the foreground and the First Baptist Church in the background, with Wisner Park in between. The commercial building at 102 Gray Street is also visible just to the right of the large tree. Next slide. In the photo at the top of the screen, we are in the western half of the park. Looking north, past the Reverend Thomas Beecher statue. In the background is the Trinity Episcopal Church on Church Street. Across North Main Street, in the eastern half of the park, can be seen the World War I Exedra and the World War II Memorial, and portions of the First Baptist Church above the treetops. The statue and both memorials are contributing objects in the boundary increase, and the First Baptist Church is a contributing building. The lower photo moves us across North Main Street, closer to the monuments, and looks southward. The World War II Memorial is now prominent in the foreground, and in the distance we see the Mark Twain Hotel, which is a contributing building in the existing historic district. Next slide. Here's some additional views of Wisner Park, taken from North Main Street. The photo to the left looks west at Park Congregational Church. The photo to the right looks east at the contributing commercial building at 102 Gray Street. Next slide. Another view from the west near the western edge of the boundary increase shows Trinity Church in the foreground with Wisner Park and the First Baptist Church in the background. Next slide. Wisner Park, seen here in a historic postcard, formed a hub not only for the religious and commercial buildings of North Main and adjacent streets, but also in the social fabric and political consciousness of Elmira. It was a center of recreation and relaxation, but also a location frequented by prominent abolitionists and social critics, such as Thomas K. Beecher, Mark Twain, and John W. Jones, all residents of Elmira. The proposed boundary increase includes one site and 4 objects at Wisner Park, 5 previously unlisted buildings, including the First Baptist Church, and 2 listed buildings, Trinity Episcopal Church and Park Congregational Church. The City of Elmira is a certified local government. No comments or letters of objection were received for this nomination. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any guests? For this nomination?
No guests that I know of.
Great. Any questions or comments from the board? North Main and West Water Streets Historic District boundary increase.
This is Jennifer Lemack, and since I grew up in Elmira, I will approve this.
All right, we have a motion to approve.
This is Wint. I'll second it.
Excellent. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you again, Dan. And moving to our final nomination for the afternoon, Chelsea Towers and J. Garner Westhouse.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the Jane Garner West House, located in Stony Point, Rockland County, is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a noteworthy local example of Second Empire style domestic architecture. Built in the early 1880s for J. Garner West and his family, the residence remains largely intact despite the loss of its original front and rear porches. The property also contains a contributing wood frame barn. Next slide. The family's accomplishment was derived from both textile and dry good companies, which continued to be successful through the early 20th century. This imposing Second Empire-style dwelling was constructed for Garner West on land bequeathed to him by his grandmother, Amelia. The original parcel, consisting of approximately 5 acres of land, was expanded to close to 60 acres. However, subdivision of the property had already begun by 1892, ultimately resulting in the approximate 1 acre property seen today. Next slide. The family resided in the house from the time of its completion to around 1900, at which time they relocated to an adjacent property also owned by the West family. Around 1940, Rollo Peters acquired the property, and the condition of the house was reportedly in a significantly deteriorated condition. Windows were out, the front and rear porches had collapsed, and the high double living room, which extends across the north end, was piled full of hay. Next slide. Nevertheless, the residence retains several character-defining aspects of the Second Empire style. Foremost amongst its traits is its mansard roof, which is punctuated by dormer windows with heavily molded hoods. The facade's central pavilion and the south-facing bay window enliven those elevations, with contrasting painted brick walls with smooth-cut stone dressings. Next slide. The interior of the house was laid out on all 4 levels on a center hall plan, aligned on the east-west axis, with vertical circulation affected by a main staircase that rises from basement to attic level at the center. The first floor is divided into a single large room to the north of the hallway, which is the house's original parlor, and 2 rooms to the south of it, a dining room and a kitchen. The second floor is divided into 2 equally sized bedrooms, a master bedroom, and 2 smaller rooms, one of which serves as the bathroom. Next slide. The principal rooms boast tall ceilings finished with characteristic molded wood trim, smooth plaster walls and ceilings, and struck plaster cornice work. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east wall provide ample opportunity to take in the sweeping views towards the Hudson River. So that's the J. Garner West House. Any questions? And I do believe the homeowner, Catherine, may be on the call if she'd like to say a few words as well.
Hi, this is Catherine Donnelly. I can't thank the board enough for hearing our mission for this house. It's been about 3 years or so since Bill Crattinger started this journey with me, and Chelsea for taking it over. And thank you both very much, going through and down several rabbit holes to find the true history of this house. My partner Tony and I, we were passionate about old houses, and we were looking long and hard for one that needed a helping hand, and this one did. When we found it back in 2017, it was fairly ravaged by Hurricane Sandy. Needed disrepair as well. So we've been painstakingly and cursing ourselves sometimes restoring it for those years. Everything back down to the lath and plaster, authentically restoring everything from the shutters to repointing, abating water, you name it. So one of the other things I just wanted to add is you can read through the report that this is not only significant because it's a Garner house, neighboring Garnerville, which takes its name essentially from the family that had this house. One of their buildings, actually the mill that they owned, is already on the National Historic Board, and this is the last remaining vestige of a home representing that family. And also, because it's a double brick construction house, we feel that it really gives homage to neighboring Haverstraw and a lot of the brick towns going up the river. They basically make up the construction of this house and actually all the patios front and back. I don't have to sell the report anymore. Like I said, Bill and Chelsea did an amazing job in writing it up, and we just want to thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions or comments from the board?
This is Wynn. The founder of this fortune, Thomas Garner, was the builder and owner of our beloved Harmony Mills in Cohoes. And he had other not so large factories and mills in 3 or 4 other communities. And I think the nomination identifies them, Wappingers Falls and others. What an extraordinary reach for a self-made capitalist. And in honor of Thomas Garner, of all of those places, I'd be happy to place his grandson's house in nomination.
Thank you, Wynn. Do I hear a second or any other questions or comments?
This is Jay. I'm happy to second.
Jay DiLorenzo, second. Any opposed or abstaining? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. That is our final nomination form. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you.
We're moving to the final segment of our meeting today, and that is the chair's report and new business. I just want to say a couple quick things. As chair of the State Review Board, I'm also on the State Council of Parks, and we held an in-person meeting in late September in wonderful weather in the Allegheny region, and did a wonderful tour of Allegheny State Park, a place that's near and dear to my heart, and I visited often, and the amusement park in Mayville on Chautauqua Lake and dinner on the Chautauqua Bell. It was just wonderful to get together and participate face-to-face in that meeting. And I just hope that the State Review Board gets back to the practice of traveling to state historic sites for at least one of its meetings per year. I'd like to put in a plug for that. I also want to say it's nice to have a meeting where all of the members of the board are present. And have a good, strong quorum and an opportunity for debate and discussion of the nominations. I hope that continues and we do more of that kind of thing moving forward. The other items on the agenda here under Chair's Report and New Business are to set the dates for the 2022 schedule. And there are 3 board resolutions to review. I assume that Kathy and or Daniel have some suggested dates for the 2022 schedule.
Yes, I would like to propose, we seem to be settling on, at least this past year, on meeting the second Thursdays of the month quarterly. So that's March, June, September, December. And I would propose maybe for 2022 that we go with that kind of schedule if that's, you know, something amenable to the board. So looking at those dates, that would be March 10th, June 9th, September 8th, and December 8th. Does that sound amenable to board members, or are there other suggestions?
It seems to be a pattern that's working. We have good participation today. I certainly open it up to board discussion at this time. Maybe we'll need a few days to check calendars and things like that. If somebody has a conflict or a problem, it's sort of hard to do on the spot. So if anybody has any discussion about that now, we can entertain that. Otherwise, within the next week or two, check your calendars and report back with any conflicts.
Can you give us those dates? Kathy, could you give us those dates again one more time?
March 10?
Yes. Yep. March 10, June 9, September 8, December 8. Those are all Thursdays.
Yeah, second Thursdays. It seems to be working. Is anybody aware of any conflicts at first glance?
No.
Yeah, I still use a paper calendar, so I don't have my 2022 calendar out yet.
And I also want to add, we won't know, of course, what the future holds in terms of in-person meetings, that it will be determined depending on the situation in the world. So it may be possible that we're back meeting in person come our next meeting in March.
Yeah, I hope so.
We'll let you know. All we know now is that currently the extension that the governor had for having these virtual meetings, I believe that ends this January. So whether or not she extends that on into 2022 is an unknown.
Understood. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments about the scheduling?
No, I was just going to say, this is Jay. It's helpful to have it the second Thursday because the Preservation League's board meetings are the third Thursday generally. So that.
Excellent.
Well,
good. All right, so we'll stick to the plan and let's a bunch of conflicts arise. Daniel, are you prepared to discuss board resolutions?
I'm prepared to discuss 2 of them, and I will apologize in advance. The resolution for Julian Adams, which was whip smart and pithy, got overwritten in a file naming exercise, and when I went to print it this morning, was not available. So we have apologized to Julian, and we will have that resolution ready in March. But I am prepared to present board resolutions for consideration for Michael Lynch and Lucy Waletsky.
Proceed.
Okay. So the first resolution drafted as such, commending Michael Lynch for exemplary service to the people of the state of New York and to the cause of historic preservation, dated December 9th, 2021. Whereas this board wishes to honor Michael F. Lynch on the occasion of his retirement from the post of Director, Division for Historic Preservation of the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and pay tribute to his 27 years of productive and devoted service to the people of the state of New York and the cause of historic preservation. And whereas Michael began his service in the State Historic Preservation Office in 1977 as a junior restoration coordinator, and initially left this agency in 1999 as a senior restoration coordinator. And whereas in this initial service to the New York State Office of Parks, Michael accrued such accomplishments as certifying the first tax leverage rehabilitation project in the country, Sibley Mansion, Rochester, 1978, assisting in organizing national conferences on windows and interiors, contributed to the National Park Service and National Trust publications, wrote for the Preservation League of New York State and the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and became president of the Association for Preservation Technology International. And whereas upon leaving public service, at least initially, Michael had a varied and accomplished career both with the not-for-profit Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, now Historic New England, the oldest and largest regional heritage organization in the nation, and in corporate and private architectural engineering practices. And whereas Michael has volunteered his expertise to numerous organizations and properties, most notable as his role as chair of the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Advisory Council for Chesterwood, the home of sculptor Daniel Chester French in Stockbridge, Mass. And whereas, with this broad experience in hand, Michael returned to New York State Parks in 2016 to serve ably in the role of Director, Division for Historic Preservation, for Commissioners Rose Harvey and Eric Kulisade, directing the work of a nation-leading state historic preservation office. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the New York State Board for Historic Preservation hereby recognizes with gratitude the decades of devoted public service performed by Michael F. Lynch, that we celebrate his accomplishments as highlighted above, and we wish him renewed health and a productive life in retirement, in hopes that he may accomplish a diverse list of preservation and family-themed projects, research, and publications. That is the draft.
Thank you, Michael. Daniel, do I hear a motion to accept the draft as written?
It's Carol, so moved.
I'd be happy to second. Any opposed or abstained? The motion is carried by unanimous consent.
Thank you, Doug. With apologies to Julian, we will skip ahead to Lucy Rockefeller Waletsky. So, a resolution from the New York State Board for Historic Preservation commending Lucy Rockefeller Waletsky for exemplary service to the people of the state of New York and to the cause of historic preservation, dated December 9th, 2021. Whereas this board wishes to honor Lucy Rockefeller Waletsky on the occasion of her last meeting in service to the New York State Board for Historic Preservation and pay tribute to her unflagging and devoted service to the people of the state of New York and the cause of historic preservation. And whereas Lucy has served as chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation since March 2007, she has served as chair of the Taconic Region Parks Commission and as a member of the New York State Council of Parks since February of 2004. And in her capacity as chair of the State Council of Parks, she has held a seat on this board. And whereas during her 14 years of service to this board, including a term as chair, Lucy has contributed to the detailed consideration of over 1,100 nominations representing the listing of tens of thousands of historic structures and sites to the state and national registers of historic places in every county of New York State. And whereas Lucy has also devoted herself to the betterment of the New York State park system, supporting projects and initiatives that have enhanced this agency's land holdings, stewardship, and environmental practices. Now therefore be it resolved that the New York State Board for Historic Preservation hereby recognizes with gratitude the decades of devoted public service performed by Lucy Rockefeller-Walensky, that we celebrate her accomplishments as highlighted above, and welcome her continued involvement in historic preservation causes and initiatives.
Thank you, Daniel. It's my distinct honor to move that we accept that resolution as proposed. And
I'll second it. This is Wind.
Thank you, Wind. Any opposed or abstained?
How dare they?
Correct. There being none, obviously the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you,
Very
Daniel.
good, Doug. You're very welcome.
Thank you all so much. What a pleasure it's been
Lucy.
to work with you.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to work with you as well, Lucy.
We will miss you, and we hope you are not far.
I will not be. I will be right there to work with you all again.
And you do such a great job running those scope meetings as well. They're just so fun to attend, and it's just really nice.
It's great to have you there. And I hope that my successor, who I hope will be Brian Irwin, who's been chair in Long Island for 11 years, I know that you will really all enjoy working with him. And I hope that there'll be even closer collaboration between the two groups going forwards. But it's been great. Thank you so much for coming all the way to Allegheny. That was a long way. Great to have you.
Not for me. Thank you, Lucy. I think we're in good hands with Brian.
Yep.
Lucy, those are heartening words, and thank you. It's just been a pleasure to know you through this lens. I also, Michael Lynch, I believe, is on our call, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to check in with us.
Please.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Doug. It has certainly been my honor and privilege to work in the State Historic Preservation Office again, this time as director. I was pleased to be welcomed back by those few people with whom I worked when I left in '99, but I was even more heartened to be welcomed back by those people who did not know me. I hope I earned their trust in the 5.5 years that I worked there as the director. I can tell you that I haven't really settled into retirement yet. It sort of feels like a long vacation. Maybe around March or so, it'll actually feel like I don't work anymore. I remain excited and proud of the work that the staff are doing. I sat through the presentations today with remarkable interest in the wide variety of property types that are presented. I take to heart Gretchen's comment that there are few nominations presented at each meeting representing African American history, but I do know over the 5.5 years that I've been there, the staff have worked diligently to find those sites and to work with local sponsors to try and get those properties listed on the National Register. So we are making progress. We are way behind in terms of representing the African American contribution to New York's history, but I can tell you that we're way ahead of most of the rest of the country, which is sad news. So I wish everyone a happy holiday, and I'll see you on the corner.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, this is Daniel. I have seeded 10 typos and misused words in your resolution. And so when you receive it, you can get out your red pen and take that exercise one final time.
When I sent my portrait picture to Kathy, I said, this is subtitled, "Yes, I'm correcting your grammar as you speak."
That's great. All right, well, thank you, everyone. It's been a fun meeting closure, and just one more item on the agenda, and that is a motion to adjourn. I'll make it. Second?
This is Wint. I'll second.
All right, as much as I hate to see you go, the meeting is concluded.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
holidays to everyone.
Doug, I hope you feel better.
Thank you. Bye-bye.